To be alone forever. Some people's greatest fear. A table for one at a fancy restaurant, falling asleep in a cold bed, a quiet, empty house. With no one to share your wins and losses with, no one to witness your happiest moments or comfort you in your most difficult ones. It's that sinking feeling in your chest, imagining that you're unlovable and undesirable and fearing you might remain that way forever. If you're single, there's a high likelihood that you've felt this way before, and if you have, there's no reason to be ashamed of it. It's normal, or dare I say expected, that you'd feel this way in a world obsessed with romantic partnerships. These fears are echoed everywhere, in the movies we watch, the songs we listen to, and even in social and political discussions. One of the first insults you hear thrown around is, "You'll never find love thinking this way." Unfortunately, this is why many people enter and stay in relationships that might not be the best, because we have this notion that being with anyone is better than being alone. But what if we could change our thinking about being single and focus more on the positive aspects of it? Here is why you should stay single. Embracing life without a romantic partner isn't easy, but if you do the work and are honest and intentional with yourself, you can create a great life for yourself. You can find happiness on your own, and for many of us, it's easier than finding the right partner. The first thing to remember is that being single isn't the same as being alone or lonely. You can be romantically single and still have fulfilling relationships with family and friends. Sharing your life with the people you love doesn't necessarily have to involve romance. There's this unspoken expectation that our romantic partners have to be our everything. They need to be our best friends, counselors, caregivers, and providers. These necessary roles can easily be filled by multiple people in our lives. You could even argue that spreading your support network across multiple people is better. It's unrealistic to think that one person can fulfill your every need and desire. In fact, this is one of the reasons a lot of relationships end. One party feels so burdened by all the emotional weight in the relationship that they burn out. By learning to share these roles and expanding your support network, you're better prepared for the difficulties in life. You're also less likely to feel lonely because you have more people to lean on. Even if your relationship with one person is suffering, you have others to turn to. This is why so many people are lonely, even people in relationships. Because they put all of their expectations on one person, they start to feel alienated and alone when those expectations are not being met. This dynamic of being alone with a partner can cut deeper than the loneliness you feel when you're single. Because in a partnership, you're not supposed to feel lonely. So adding to your loneliness is the shame and the guilt of feeling lonely in the first place. It's also difficult to share this feeling with others. Friends and family might have difficulty believing you because they see the snippets of life with your partner. So they remind you of the good times and tell you that all relationships require hard work, because it's commonly believed that being lonely together is better than being alone. Many people stay in relationships that they should leave because they're afraid of being single. And if more people had a positive view of single life, I think the pressure to stay in unhappy relationships would decrease. Being in a relationship doesn't mean you'll become your best self, but this still seems to be the way of life we're pressured to conform to. Romance is the central theme of countless Hollywood blockbusters, novels, and TV shows. We're constantly being sold the idea that love will complete us, that we're nothing on our own. We're taught to look for our better half as if we can't be whole on our own. Even apart from the stories sold to us by the media, society also seems to favor people who are in couples. Practically, life is just so much cheaper when you have someone to split the rent and groceries with. Healthcare plans and travel expenses privilege couples, and setting money aside, a spouse or a common law partner holds a certain status in your life, like an extension of yourself. Your partner holds the title of someone who knows you better than anyone else, even if you have a friend or family member who might be worthy of that role. Friends and family might see your life as incomplete without a special someone. Everything could be going right for you, but without a partner, you might be pitied and seen as a failure. The people in your life could be trying to influence you to find someone, making you feel that being alone is an inferior option. And after a while, you believe it's what you should do. But it doesn't have to be this way. There are lots of ways to live a happy life, and it's important to know what it feels like to live a happy life on your own. While it is true that the world isn't set up to support single people, there are huge benefits to spending life on your own. When you're single, you have complete control over your life choices. You want to move to a new city or change careers? You can fully pivot the direction of your life without having to consider the needs or wants of a partner. You can take risks without fear that your choices will negatively impact someone else. You don't have to feel guilty about going after what you truly want because ultimately, the only person you have to consider is yourself. It extends to little things like decorating your house, what time you want to wake up in the morning, and what you eat for dinner. While these sound like small luxuries, this kind of freedom and independence doesn't come easy with a partner, even with active communication. When you're single, everything in your life is entirely in your control, and this might sound daunting. Some people prefer being told what to do. It's why a lot of people are stuck in codependent relationships that they can't get out of. But being single forces you to work through any of the issues of dependency you might have. The control you gain over your life allows you to develop a sense of self and to figure out who you really are and what you want out of life. As an adult, singleness is the first time you get this opportunity. As a child, choices were made for you, and as a young adult, the school system controls most of your waking hours. If you're ushered straight from that phase into a series of relationships, you'll never really know what it feels like to live life uninfluenced. While some might be fine with this, I think it can stunt your growth. As an independent adult, you have the chance to get to know who you are when no one's watching, and you gain trust in your ability to make the right choices for yourself. Don't deny yourself the opportunity of self-discovery. An extended period of your life, free from any notion of romance, can help you tune into your emotional side. You learn what it feels like to listen to yourself without the distraction of outside noise that a partner often brings. You can hear what you want and follow through on your desires. When you become good at listening to yourself, you can begin to live a life that aligns with your own values. You learn how to soothe yourself in times of stress, take care of yourself, and enjoy your own company. And it sounds easy, right? Well, being single definitely also has its downsides. I don't want to paint a romanticized version of being single because that would be ironic. You see, even with the best friends and family, being single can still be lonely. Your friends and family have other people they're devoted to, and because you're not in a romantic relationship with them, they don't owe you first priority in their lives. You might want to vent to someone after a rough day at work and find that your friends are too busy and can't meet up. Managing chores and life tasks all on your own can be a challenge. Then there's the emotional and physical intimacy that most of us crave, even if only occasionally. Someone to buy you flowers or just make a cup of coffee for you in the morning. Also, in a partnership, it can be easy to blame your problems on another person. When you're single, there is no place to hide. You have to take responsibility for your life, the good and the bad. And if something is happening that's making you miserable, then you are the one who needs to change it. The difficulties of living alone can be so intense that they sometimes lead people to turn towards unsatisfactory relationships. Scrolling through dating apps trying to find the next first date, finding comfort in awkward situationships, or constantly seeking casual sex can all be coping mechanisms for starving off loneliness. Of course, finding yourself in strange, unfulfilling romantic entanglements isn't the end of the world, and each case is specific. But using other people to shield or distract ourselves from our insecurities and problems is easy. It helps us avoid looking deep within ourselves and investigating our dependent behavior. I think intentional singleness requires a lot of courage. It shows you're willing to plunge into the depths of yourself without fear of what you'll find. It can be seen as an act of self-love. You're willing to be your own company, spend time with yourself, and let your thoughts and actions guide the trajectory of your life. Your sense of worth, desirability, and validation has to come within. You can't fast-track this work through a month or two of being single between relationships. It might take years of singleness to realize that you're better off on your own, or prefer to be alone rather than with someone you don't like. You might even arrive at a place where you prefer to remain single forever, but this time it doesn't come with a sinking feeling of despair, but with excitement and a sense of liberation. If you're currently in a loving romantic relationships, don't take this as a reason to break up with them. Being in a relationship has its merits, and what you want from life is different for everyone. And I can't deny that dating can be fun, and every relationship you have is an opportunity to learn more about yourself, albeit through the lens of somebody else. Plus, you could fall in love and find the perfect partner that feels like they complete you and spend the rest of your life with them, because truly there is no template to this life. Remember that staying single for a while doesn't completely mean ignoring your desire for a relationship one day. Instead, it's an opportunity to find satisfaction despite that desire. It's about recognizing who you can be when you're alone and the type of person who could complement you. Who you are is special and worth protecting, and after a season of being alone, you'll more likely value yourself and your time. You'll know that it's only worth being in a relationship if it supports who you truly are, and if not, you'll have the confidence that you can remain alone. True compatibility is hard to find, and the mysteries of attraction are far too complex to dive into here, but after spending some time on your own, what if you do meet someone who adds to what you've built for yourself? that can acknowledge and love the person you've become when no one's watching. How can you deny yourself that? To be single doesn't mean you have to stay single forever if that isn't something you want. It's a chance to get to know yourself better, learn the value of your time and who you really are. It's about recognizing that you shouldn't just throw yourself at anyone for the sake of companionship, but it's also about not getting too tied up in yourself that you close yourself off from any real chance at love. Finding happiness on your own is important, but sharing happiness with another person could also be important. A saying goes, happiness held is the seed, happiness shared is the flower. Don't get so caught up in your single life that you find yourself clutching the seed in your fist with a death grip. When the right person comes along, open your hand and invite them into your world, and don't be afraid to spend some time in theirs too. If what you've built is stable, you can always return, and that confidence is what makes the best relationships. Only when you've spent time nurturing your seed of happiness will it be ready to bloom when someone comes along to water it. Love is a truly complex thing. Watch this next video to find out all about it. Speaking of the best things of 2024, for the past few years we've been fortunate enough to partner with Brilliant, a platform that truly embodies everything we try to do on this channel. From math to science and computer science, Brilliant has been an invaluable resource in exploring these big ideas that both inspire and challenge us. Honestly, I couldn't be happier to have worked with them these few years and hope to keep introducing them to more of you guys. If for some reason you still don't know what Brilliant is, here's why they're amazing. Brilliant is an interactive learning platform that makes mastering complex ideas approachable and even fun. With thousands of hands-on lessons in topics like math, data analysis, programming, and AI, Brilliant empowers you to learn by doing. Whether you're tackling the building blocks of logic, or exploring cutting-edge topics like AI, it's all designed to engage you directly with problem solving. One of the reasons I've loved using Brilliant for years is how easy it is to fit learning into my life. Their mobile app and bite-sized lessons let you level up in just a few minutes. Whether you're on a lunch break, waiting in line, or trying to make better use of time you'd otherwise spend doom scrolling. For me, swapping TikTok sessions for Brilliant practice has been a game changer. But it's not just convenient, it's incredibly effective. Brilliant's first principles approach starts at the core and builds up, ensuring you not only learn concepts, but truly understand them. Each lesson involves hands-on problem solving, a proven method that's up to 6 times more effective than passive learning like watching lecture videos. Plus, all the content is crafted by experts from leading institutions like MIT, Caltech, Duke, and companies like Microsoft and Google. One course that recently blew my mind was How LLMs Work, which dives into the mechanics behind large language models like ChatGPT. It broke down this incredibly complex subject into simple, interactive steps that made it not just understandable but fascinating. If you want to try this course or any of Brilliant's thousands of lessons for free for 30 days, visit brilliant.org/aperture or scan the QR code on screen. And if you decide to stick with it, you'll get 20% off an annual premium subscription. Just click the link in the description or head to brilliant.org/aperture to start your journey today. Destiny isn't a matter of chance, it's a matter of choice. It's not a thing to be waited for, it's a thing to be achieved. Have you ever felt like you're living a life that was designed for you? Like you've found a way to make money with your passions, you're dating your dream partner, and suddenly everything feels like it was meant to be. Some call this destiny of fate that was predetermined for you. But what is destiny? Is it a place we have no control over? A destination we would always arrive at no matter what we do? Or is destiny a matter of choice, a thing to be achieved? This concept of destiny is one that we find in the media all around us. From ancient folklore to modern comic book heroes, our society likes to tell stories about heroes and their destinies. One of the best pieces of media I've seen surrounding this topic is the 1965 novel by Frank Herbert, Dune. For most, Dune is just another Hollywood blockbuster, but to me, Dune isn't just a story. It's rich with philosophical questions about destiny, morality, humanity, and personal identity. This is the philosophy of Dune. The story of Dune is based on a straightforward assumption that humans are adaptable. The people in Dune, who live almost 10,000 years in the future, have learned how to adapt to changing planetary environments, repeatedly restart their lives and governments, and turn seemingly inhospitable environments to their advantage. So the first lesson that Dune teaches us before the story even starts is that resilience isn't just about enduring hardship, but about learning how to harness it and find our strength. This raises more questions about the philosophy of action. What exactly constitutes future? We all make many decisions and actions that we take responsibility for daily, but almost all of those decisions have consequences that we can't see and never intended. My foot moves the sand around when I step into the sand, displacing sand particles and even smaller molecules. But my intention has nothing to do with the sand, I'm simply trying to walk forward. But due to his powers and the destiny thrust upon him, his existence ripples on his entire world. This of course raises questions about power and, because we are all flawed, corruption. Paul's sister Alla falls toxic to the allure of power in the novel because power can corrupt from within, even in the best and most well-intentioned minds. But Dune teaches us that power is to serve, not to dominate, and that any pursuit of power unchecked by morality can lead to the erosion of individuals and, in turn, society. Paul's ultimate moral question will have to do with the vision that he sees of a brutal extermination of billions of people in the future. However, this extermination will lead to humanity as a whole being saved. Decisions like these are difficult, and your choice will never feel good. This is why Paul's story is captivating. He's forced to either continue on his path knowing the disaster ahead, end of the human race. Whether we can rationalize this decision comes down to whether we think there's a difference between allowing things to happen and taking active measures to ensure they do. Can you be morally culpable if you simply leave the trolley on its current course, since you didn't actively participate in the death of anyone? Paul's moral predicament teaches us a lesson about knowledge. Just because we know something to be true, or in Paul's case know something will happen, should we revolve all of our decisions around it? Every decision we make has a ripple effect on our lives and the lives of those around us. And even though knowledge and the logic that comes from it can be a guiding force, it's not everything. Dune reminds us that the universe and its intangible powers are always one step ahead of whatever logic or answers we think we might have. Life is often more about the unseen parts than the parts we can see. Of course, for Paul, more is foreseen than for most of us, which raises the idea of memory and identity. The question Dune raises is Paul a singular being with different memories housed within him, or are the memories within him many different beings inhabiting his consciousness? He wasn't born with these memories, though. He acquires them ceremoniously as an adult. At this point, he's already formed an identity of his own, so perhaps the memories that inhibit him aren't actually changing who he is. But we all know that who we are as adults is also fluid, even if we like to think our brains and hearts are fully formed. We might have a strong sense of self, but our identity continues to shift. We might not be able to experience our ancestors' memories literally. Still, we certainly can inherit attributes and even trauma from our family members that impact who we are and who we grow up to be. Our relationship to growth, how we embrace it or how we avoid it. Growth is an active pursuit, not something that happens to us. And without large-scale growth, survival on a larger scale might not be possible. In Dune, each faction's survival before the story begins depends on advancing and mastering specific skills and ways of living. Then, when we live with Paul through his journey, we see how the world of Dune has to evolve further to serve humanity's ultimate survival, even if that evolution and growth aren't always pretty. The warning of Dune might ring true to our times if you glance at the arid land and resource-stripped environments. At its heart, it's a story about global warming and its repercussions. It is about us needing to diversify where we live as a species to survive, and reminding us that the future isn't certain even then. Dune forces us to confront difficult questions about our world and look beyond our individual lives into our collective lives. In the near or far future, is it imperative for humans to get off Earth? Futurists would answer yes. They would insist that we have to spread out to ensure our survival. We would need to populate new environments that aren't on this planet because we already face the reality that our planet can't always sustain us. In Dune, Paul's difficult moral question to allow extreme violence in the future is for this large-scale survival to happen. But what if we ask a more profound question? Does humanity deserve to be saved at all? If Paul had intervened and stopped the violence, humanity might have failed in the end, but why do we assume that's a bad thing? If we remove our obvious self-interest, might we see another side to Paul's choice? To help us better understand the far-reaching question, we have to ask, is there something valuable about humanity's survival? Do we inherently have something good, important, or unique to offer the universe, without which it would be worse off? Things get tricky. We drain natural resources and start wars, and we have arguably pushed ourselves and our natural world closer to the brink of disaster than if we hadn't been here in the first place. Maybe, theoretically, the survival of the human race isn't what we, or Paul, should prefer. If the only way for humanity to expand in Dune is through the violence and tyranny, maybe it isn't worth it. Everything does come to an end at some point. One benefit we might present in our favor as a race is the creation of aesthetic beauty. Art, music, and intellectually creative pursuits can be left behind and learned from. Humans are uniquely suited to make these things. We innovate and we create. Unless another alien species might be out there that can do something similar, our unique creativity is lost forever. But then, does the universe benefit from this innovation, or do we only create for selfish reasons? Dune forces us to look at the cost of certain decisions, even at the sacrifice of humanity altogether. Often we make sacrifices and don't know exactly how they'll play out for the future. We sacrifice time with our family and friends to start a business we're passionate about, without knowing if that business will be successful, but we do it because we have a vision of our future. It's scary, but a life without sacrifice is a life without growth. To live a life with sacrifice, you need courage. Without courage, the story of Dune wouldn't be possible. Although Paul inherits the powers and memories of his ancestors, without the courage to overcome his fear, his journey wouldn't exist. His ancestors understand that fear is a natural reaction and know it can paralyze us. We've all felt it. The fear of starting a new job, becoming a parent, or going down a ski mountain for the first time. It can stop us in our tracks and make us second guess ourselves. Fear can stop us from pursuing what we really want and even what we're meant to be. It can stop us from fulfilling our destiny. In Dune, Paul faces his fear, but facing fear doesn't mean getting rid of it. We will never have a life without fear. Facing fear is instead about mastering it, analyzing our fear and knowing every inch of it. Paul embraces his fear with courage and self-awareness to become the man he is meant to be. We, like Paul, aren't perfect. We make tough calls hoping they're the moral ones, and accept that sometimes they just might not be. But the moment we pursue life with fear and let that fear control us, we fall victim to ourselves. We lose control. But if we can overcome that fear with courage, take the bull by the horns and decide the course of our lives, we will certainly lose some things, but we will gain much more. If you like this style of video where I analyze philosophy or psychology behind popular media, let me know. There's definitely some other movies and books that I'd like to get into. You can leave your suggestions in the comments below. In 2010, around 40,000 people died from drug overdoses in the United States. Quantifying the importance and meaning of individual human life in a single statistic is impossible. But that number might already seem high, especially if you knew one of those people. But it gets worse. So much worse. In 2021, more than 100,000 people died from drug overdose, and that number seems to continue to increase each year. Pinpointing an exact reason behind these rising numbers is complicated, but it all starts with these 5 words: fentanyl and the dark web. According to a UCLA study, fentanyl, a synthetic opioid that's 50 times stronger than heroin, was responsible for around 10% of drug overdose deaths in 2010. In 2015, the first spike of deaths as a result of fentanyl overdose happened. It remained localized in the eastern United States for several years, until 2019, when it made its way across the country. Suddenly, everyone was exposed and death rates skyrocketed. As of 2021, a staggering 66% of drug overdoses were as a result of fentanyl, and that number keeps rising. Now you might say, what's the problem? If people take drugs, they should be willing to face the consequences, and while you may be right, the problem is that most people who are dying from fentanyl overdose aren't even aware they're consuming it. And it's all because of one group of people. The fentanyl kings of the dark web, criminal gangs who have figured out how to manufacture and distribute fentanyl illegally. Because fentanyl is much cheaper to produce than other drugs, they've begun lacing it with those other drugs and selling them to unsuspecting users. This is the true cause of the fentanyl crisis. Between 2010 and 2021, the amount of drugs used didn't double, nor did the number of users. In fact, drug use hasn't increased very much, it's just become much more lethal. There is a solution, but it's a rather radical one that requires an open mind to even consider. What if we controlled the supply itself instead of trying to control the suppliers? If you can't beat them, join them, if you will. The approach isn't all that crazy when you think about how the opioid crisis exploded. Gone are the days of drugs being distributed on street corners or from corrupt doctors. Many now come from a much more sinister place. The dark web. Drug buyers no longer need a back alley to sell drugs. People don't need to steal from pharmacies or doctors' offices to get pills. They can sit at their computer or on their phone and purchase their drug of choice and have it delivered to their home. Using special browsers and software that conceals your IP addresses, users are hard, if not almost impossible, to trace on the dark web. This makes it the perfect place for secret shops to sell illegal substances. Unsurprisingly, this poses a massive challenge for law enforcement, which is trying to crack down on the illegal drug trade. The dark web leads investigators and police on a never-ending game of whack-a-mole as they try and stamp out anonymous markets, only to see new ones pop up. One software called Tor routes user data through servers worldwide, disguising your IP address. This means that communications between the buyer and seller end up scrambled, for lack of a better term. Then you add crypto as a means of monetary exchange, and you can see why it's almost impossible to regulate our way out of this mess. All of this has helped fuel the fentanyl crisis. The dark web offers an accessible vehicle to buy drugs and opens up the sellers to a whole market that wasn't there before. The people who are curious but not about to commit a crime out in the open. Now they can do it from their couch. Yes, the dark web has benefits. Whistleblowers who work in government or other industries can alert journalists to important facts without being identified. People in authoritarian regimes might use the dark web to avoid detection or having their internet tracked. But the same features that make the dark web appealing for people who are trying to stay safe lure in drug traffickers to avoid police surveillance. By now, the dark web is so global that even municipal police officers have to look globally to track down shipments and transactions of illegal drugs. And if one site gets shut down, another one inevitably will take its place. But before it even makes it onto the dark web, dealers have to decide to use it. Fentanyl doesn't end up in shipments of cocaine by mistake. So why lace it in there if the chance for fatality is so high? Some dealers think they can mitigate the risk by measuring fentanyl carefully. If done correctly, fentanyl can help create a stream of return customers because it's so addictive. This explains why it's so often found in cocaine or in counterfeit Xanax and Adderall. It's more addictive than those drugs themselves, so it keeps people coming back for more. Also, there's the capitalist argument. It's cheaper than the other opioids. A small fraction of fentanyl can mimic the high of larger doses of other opioids like heroin or painkillers. Dealers will use simple binding agents and a small amount of fentanyl when they make counterfeit opioid pills because it helps their bottom line. The potency of fentanyl also makes it a really easy drug to traffic. A formerly incarcerated dealer claimed that he could make over 10 times the amount of counterfeit pills when he used fentanyl instead of other drugs on their own. Even though fentanyl is heavily regulated in hospitals or other medical settings, it's not regulated at all on the internet, much less the dark web. So small mistakes by uneducated, malicious, or ignorant dealers can be fatal. The big question is, can we stop it? Of course, to do that, we need to know who the people behind these dark websites are, the operations. Just like the infamous drug lords like Pablo Escobar or El Chapo, there are kingpins running the dark web trade as well. It all started with a site called Silk Road, the first large-scale dark web drug market, which began in 2011. It received a lot of media attention, and eventually, law enforcement was able to step in and shut it down in 2013, but more sites took its place. Alphabay popped up and was shut down in 2017, but has recently been clawing its way back to the top. Dream Market was also a popular market until it was shuttered in 2019. Its inner workings can tell us a lot about how these sites function. Dream Market had around 100,000 listings and at the time was the biggest dark web shopping center for drugs. More than half its listings were for illicit substances, although it also sold things like designer clothes, counterfeit money, and stolen online banking information. The shopping experience is similar to what most of us experience when we need a new yoga mat or that random piece that broke off your fridge. Buyers can go to any of these sites, search the inventory, and pay in crypto, and the drugs will arrive on their doorstep. And like the typical online shopping experience, buyers can leave reviews for vendors and products. Let's say you're buying a new TV. You might go online and read some reviews, look for the best deal, or see which retailers are the most reputable for what you're looking for. The worst case scenario is you might buy a shoddy TV. But on the dark web drug markets, the worst case scenario is you buy drugs that are laced with something like fentanyl that could kill you. The reviews might read like an old product on Amazon, but they are as consequential as it gets. One review on Dream Market of 100 milligrams of the drug carfentanil said, It took forever to find a new Carfent supplier, finally found a good vendor. It's great. It reads innocent enough, but carfentanil is a synthetic opioid used to sedate large animals that is even more potent than fentanyl. 100 milligrams is enough to kill dozens of people. With all the difficulty around taking down sites and kingpins that operate them, there have been some high-profile success stories in curbing the dark web drug market. A 40-year-old Indian-British man named Banmeet Singh ran an international drug ring from his home in the UK. He was charged with conspiracy to commit money laundering and to distribute and possess with intent to distribute controlled substances in April 2024. He admitted that from 2012 to 2017 he was active on the dark web drug market, distributing heroin, cocaine, fentanyl, ecstasy, LSD, ketamine, Xanax, and plenty of other drugs. He had to surrender more than 4,000 Bitcoin, which was valued at more than $245 million, and was given the same priority level of threat as El Chapo. Then there was Operation Spectre, an enforcement operation from the US Department of Justice that ended in May 2023 that was meant to target opioid and fentanyl trafficking on the dark web. The operation resulted in 288 arrests, the most ever for this type of operation, and the seizure of 117 firearms and 850 kilograms of drugs, which also included 64 kilograms of fentanyl or fentanyl-laced narcotics. On top of all that, they also seized $53 million in cash in crypto. This international effort spanned 3 continents to disrupt fentanyl and opioid trafficking, and was accompanied by a public awareness campaign to promote resources for those struggling with substance abuse. The operation's message to criminals on the dark web is, you can try and hide in the furthest reaches of the internet, but the Justice Department will find you and hold you accountable for your crimes. This only furthered the Drug Enforcement Agency's commitment to shutting down the fentanyl and opioid supply chain from beginning to end. They may be committed now, but the dark web keeps growing and growing, and inevitably another kingpin will pop up, and no matter how successful they've been in the past, authorities will just need to start over again. So is it more effective to try and shut it all down, or just control the supply instead? In the 1920s, the US banned alcohol, but people didn't stop drinking. They went underground, and illegal traffickers operated similarly to how those on the dark web operate now. Illegal activity increased, there was no regulation, and alcohol that was much stronger and more dangerous than what had previously been for sale became widely available. Are we in this era with the drug trade? And if so, is it time to rethink our approach? The goal is, by whatever means necessary, to save lives. God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. The words of Friedrich Nietzsche have echoed through generations. Although many know the statement and even quote it, only a few people truly understand its meaning. Because just like much of Nietzsche's work, there's more than meets the eye. This is the story of Nietzsche, the man who killed God. At face value, the statement God is dead means that God existed and no longer exists. Or in a more philosophical sense, God only exists in the hearts of those who believe, and so, at a time when it seemed like Europe was turning towards atheism, God no longer existed. God was dead. While this was certainly part of what Nietzsche meant, it wasn't the full story. Nietzsche wasn't praising atheism or the fact that belief in God was dying. He was just explaining how a decline in the belief in God creates both a crisis and an opportunity. God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was the holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives? Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? Although the first line of the statement is the most well known, the last line is the one that tells us Nietzsche's true intent. He believed that to fill the void created by a lack of belief in God, humans would need to become gods ourselves, creating our own values and morals. For some this was liberating and comforting, but for others it was the validation they needed to commit heinous crimes against humanity. After dropping the most lethal weapon humanity had ever created, J. Robert Oppenheimer lamented, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." He realized he had opened Pandora's box and had forever put humanity in mortal danger. I can't help but wonder if Nietzsche would have felt the same way if he saw the results of his philosophy on our world. Or is it something he would have condoned or even encouraged? To figure that out, we have to go back to the beginning of his life and his philosophy. Ironically, Friedrich Nietzsche was born to a town pastor, Karl Ludwig Nietzsche, and his wife Franziska Nietzsche, in 1844. His uncle and both of his grandfathers were Lutheran ministers, and his grandfather on his father's side was a scholar who wrote about the survival of Christianity. It's safe to say Nietzsche grew up surrounded by Christianity. When he was 5, he lost his father to a brain hemorrhage, his 2-year-old brother died 6 months later. Nietzsche and his younger sister Elizabeth were left in the sole care of their mother. Losing both his father and younger brother so young had an impact on his personal beliefs, and these tragic events stayed with him his entire life. Growing up, he was interested in music and literature. He was notably fond of the composer Richard Wagner. He appreciated romantic writers like David Strauss, who wrote the infamous Life of Jesus Critically Exclaimed, a book that demythologized Jesus Christ and was controversial for obvious reasons. Nietzsche went to boarding school and eventually enrolled at the University of Bonn in 1864, where he studied theology, the study of religion, and philology, the historical study of literary and canonical texts. During his time as a student, his peers and teachers considered him a brilliant scholar. He quickly directed his focus to philology and pursued it at the University of Leipzig. There he started reading the works of the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer and was impressed by his godless worldview and the value of art in his philosophy of pessimism. Schopenhauer also understood humanity's main motivation, which he described as an aimless striving or desire. He believed that the will could never be satisfied. It always wants something, and when it gets what it wants something else. Anything this insatiable will inevitably lead to suffering. There's never satisfaction. If this sounds familiar, it's because Schopenhauer's pessimism was inspired by Buddhism. The Buddha insisted that craving was the source of human suffering, which is very similar to Schopenhauer's philosophy. Schopenhauer believed humans had to deny their will to be compassionate and good. This involved living a life of self-denial, rejecting earthly pleasures, and denying one's desire as much as possible. Filled with inspiration from Schopenhauer and Wagner, Nietzsche wrote his first book, The Birth of Tragedy. In it, he laments the loss of Dionysian energy in Western society. In Greek mythology, Dionysus is the god of fertility, wine, pleasure, and theater. Dionysian energy refers to the sensual, spontaneous, and emotional aspects of human nature. Nietzsche believed that since the time of Socrates, Western society had become too focused on logic and rationality, to the point where society had become repressed and even unhealthy. Perhaps there is a realm of wisdom from which the logician is exiled. Perhaps art is even a necessary correlative of and supplement for science. Nietzsche described reality and creativity as non-rational. This Dionysian spirit of embracing primordial creativity and the joy of existence was best expressed in art and music. In his time, there was what Nietzsche considered a rebirth of the tragic spirit in music by the likes of Wagner, Beethoven, and Bach. He felt their music was filled with Dionysian energy and could help save European culture from repression. At the University of Leipzig, Nietzsche met the German composer Richard Wagner, whom he admired greatly. Nietzsche enjoyed an almost familial friendship with Wagner, even though the composer was of a similar age to his father. They bonded over their appreciation for the philosophy of Schopenhauer and, of course, music. Even though their friendship was filled with conflict, Nietzsche was very proud to have Wagner as a friend. Their fights affected him deeply. After writing The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche turned away from Schopenhauer and Wagner, rejecting what he saw as a life-denying philosophy on one hand and art of the past on the other. He wrote his second major work, Human, All Too Human, which was more science-inspired. It moved away from the idea that art and tragedy would restore culture and toward a culture grounded in scientific knowledge. Amid the different philosophical trajectories, Nietzsche's friendship with Wagner ended. Human, All Too Human marks the first time Nietzsche started writing in short passages and aphorisms as a style to reflect his new philosophical direction. He didn't give a comprehensive account explaining why he started writing this way. Still, it did allow him to explore different themes and perspectives in each book, and it likely also worked better for him due to his frequent bouts of illness. Nietzsche was very sick throughout his life. At the age of 23, he was injured in military service. He suffered a chest wound that took a long time to heal. At 25, he contracted diphtheria and dysentery while taking care of wounded soldiers in the Franco-Prussian War. At 34, Nietzsche resigned his position as a professor at Basel University due to his health issues. He had eyesight problems, migraine headaches, and was prone to vomiting. His health deteriorated so much that he was unable to function in his role. While Nietzsche struggled with his physical health, he pursued the value of good psychological health in his work. For Nietzsche, that meant avoiding the abyss of nihilism while at the same time staying far away from biblical values that he considered unhealthy. In one of his works, The Gay Science, he famously declared that God is dead. He believed that belief in the Christian God was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain and that it was destined to collapse. This wasn't surprising, as Nietzsche was writing after the Age of Enlightenment in Europe. The Age of Enlightenment was an intellectual and philosophical movement in Europe around the 17th and 18th centuries. During this period, there was a scientific revolution, and religion started to take a back seat in favor of reason and the scientific method. The power of religious authority, which had been dormant for over a millennia, was shrinking in its influence over European society. Atheism was becoming more accepted and popular. However, unlike most other atheists at the time, Nietzsche wasn't interested in proving that God didn't exist. He considered that a given, so he focused on preparing society for the inevitable absence of a God figure and the long shadow it would cast on humanity. Without God, the morals of Judeo-Christianity lost their foundations for belief. Philosophers in Nietzsche's time tried to find a rational justification for these same values, but Nietzsche thought this was naive. Without God, these values will ultimately vanish, but they're thoroughly ingrained in the psyche of the Western world. To uproot them, Nietzsche took it upon himself to deconstruct the origin of these values by demonstrating that they don't have a foundation in rational thought. In his book, The Genealogy of Morals, Nietzsche deconstructed values in the Bible to show that they come from slaves' resentment toward their masters rather than a rational concern for others. He described the dominant emotion that created slave morality as slaves' prejudice against their masters who had achieved the kind of happiness they could not. Before the dominance of slave morality, the masters or nobles evaluated people using a good and bad framework. They valued people based on their exceptionality. Nietzsche referred to the way nobles valued things as master morality, given that the nobles were masters of the slaves. Slave morality took the nobles' values and condemned them as evil and the opposite to be morally good. Any harm towards another person was considered morally wrong. This was their philosophical revenge against the masters, born from resentment. Christianity was Nietzsche's primary example of slave morality, valuing equality, humility, selfless concern for others, love, and forgiveness. He cites the vengeful outbursts in the Bible as more evidence for its foundation in resentment. For a religion based on love and forgiveness, there are quite a few vengeful moments and diatribes on brimstone, hellfire, and damnation. These values and condemnations seem at direct odds with each other. In addition to them having an irrational foundation, Nietzsche believed that biblical values were actually harmful to one's psychological health. Guilt plays a significant role in the Christian psyche. Nietzsche suggests that it's very similar to the notion of indebtedness. When we harm someone, slave morality indebts us to them. We're to be punished by owing the victim something. This relationship between compensation and immoral action is internalized. When someone commits an immoral act, they feel indebted, negatively impacting their sense of self-worth. They feel guilt. Moral guilt is internalized in a very intense way. It applies to any violation of the rules, regardless of whether there's an actual victim. Anyone can resent and blame the rule breaker regardless of whether they're a victim or not. Guilt even becomes free from rules to form a pathological desire for self-punishment. We want to be punished to alleviate ourselves from the feeling of indebtedness. We're striving for purity. The ascetic priest, he had obviously been victorious. His kingdom had come. People no longer protested against pain, they thirsted after pain. The logical conclusion of this way of thinking ultimately leads to becoming an ascetic, someone who rejects self-indulgence and practices extreme self-discipline. The only way to live free from the feeling of indebtedness is to always be punishing yourself. According to Nietzsche, this harms a person's sense of self-worth. A big problem for Western society is that the death of God leaves a void that humans need to fill as valued creatures. Nietzsche believed it was the role of philosopher types like himself to create these values. Nietzsche isn't a nihilist as many may have assumed. Although he's usually credited as the father of nihilism, he's actually protested against it. While acknowledging that there's no inherent value in anything, Nietzsche believed that living in this valueless state can lead to despair and suicide, and as a result, should be avoided. That's why Nietzsche spent much of his time writing proposing new values for humanity. However, how he intended his proposed values to be understood isn't 100% clear. He most likely didn't mean for them to be taken as objective truth, because he insists that values must be created. They don't exist in the world to be discovered. In this way, Nietzsche believed in perspectivism, the philosophy that we don't have access to objective truth in the world because we always view things from a perspective. We can't access an independent point of view like some omniscient God. When philosophers write about an objective truth, Nietzsche suggests they're speaking more about themselves and the perspective rather than the truth. He seems to think of value creation almost as an artistic expression, but just as he assessed biblical values by how they impact psychological health, his own values are intended to produce a healthier mind. The ultimate goal of his values is to create the conditions for a healthier psyche in a post-God world, where slave morality rejects so much of life, like bodily pleasures and excellence. Nietzschean values align with life itself. This couldn't be more present than in his value of affirmation. Affirmation is about saying yes to life, all the pain, joy, and pleasure. It's about saying yes to every detail of our past, present, and future. It's taking what is necessary in life and finding it beautiful. I want to learn more and more to see as beautiful what is necessary in things. Amor fati. Let that be my love henceforth. I don't want to wage war against what is ugly. I don't want to accuse. I don't even want to accuse those who accuse. Looking away shall be my only negation. And all in all, and on the whole, someday I wish to be a only yes-sayer. Nietzsche's affirmation rejects nihilism, which finds no value in life. It also undermines values that reject the fundamental parts of life, like the slave morality he described. Christianity requires repenting our life on earth to access heaven, a more pure plane of existence. It asks us to turn against ourselves and our bodies, and it wants us to negate life. Nietzsche asks us to affirm it. Now, it's important not to confuse affirmation with hedonism. Nietzsche criticized hedonism for making pain and evil. Not only is pain a fundamental part of life, but it's instrumental in our ability to overcome and affirm life. Being sick and recovering allows you to appreciate life more, which wouldn't be possible without the pain of sickness. Without experiencing pain, we'd never be able to appreciate pleasure. Where Christianity asks you to reject sensuality in your desire for excellence, Nietzsche's affirmation asks you to embrace them. His value even asks you to say yes to those rejecting life through slave morality, pessimism, and nihilism. This doesn't mean you accept their beliefs, but embrace their presence and necessity in life. In Nietzsche's doctrine on the eternal recurrence, he tests your ability to affirm life. Imagine that you'll live your life the exact same way over and over again for eternity. Your life as it's lived is a cycle that will keep repeating. Can you say yes to your most painful, embarrassing memories? Can you allow them to happen again and again for eternity? Will you live the rest of your life in a way you can affirm? This test helps you affirm that everything that has happened to you in your life up until this moment was necessary, and teaches you to strive towards a life that you would be willing to live over and over again. And not just the good parts of life, you say yes to everything, from the highs of a young romance to the lows of your most painful breakup. After Nietzsche left his university position, he lived a nomadic life, traveling Europe, looking for a more accommodating climate for his health. He became friends with an academic named Lou Salome, with whom he had a strong intellectual connection. Nietzsche, his friend Paul Ray, and Salome planned to move in together to form an intellectual commune, but both Nietzsche and Paul developed romantic feelings for Salome. She left to go live with Paul after Nietzsche proposed to her unsuccessfully, and it was a painful end to their collective relationship. In his writing, Nietzsche described a person capable of affirming their life entirely as superhuman or Ubermensch. In his text, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the prophet Zarathustra prepares his disciples for the coming of this superhuman. The Ubermensch wasn't a specific person or race destined to enslave others, as some have carelessly interpreted. It's just somebody who embodies Nietzsche's value of affirmation to its fullest extent. Someone who embraces all of life, not rejecting it as the worshippers of slave morality do. If we're to affirm everything of life itself, for Nietzsche, that means embracing an undeniable internal drive that is present in all living things. This internal drive is what he called a will to power, an ingrained inclination towards growth, strength, and expression. We find happiness in overcoming resistance to achieve our end, which ultimately gives us a sense of power and satisfaction. Life will grow, spread, seize, become dominant, not from any morality or immorality, but because it's living, and because life simply is will to power. If this rubs you the wrong way, you're not alone. It's one of the most controversial parts of Nietzsche's philosophy. He believed our will to power is inescapable, as it's a fundamental component of life. To express our will to power is to live more healthy. While this view encourages mastery in the form of self-overcoming, it also seems to encourage domination over others. Nietzsche believed we shouldn't pretend all humans are equal and that the more powerful and skilled people should lead the weaker ones. The problem with this ideology is that while it might seem healthier for the individual to express their desire to expand and dominate, that domination comes at the expense of another person who is dominated and not free to pursue their own will to power. It's because of this that many people blame Nietzsche's philosophy for the rise of Nazi Germany and other totalitarian states. Although some scholars have suggested that Nietzsche put a much bigger emphasis on self-mastery rather than the dominion of others, that notion continues to be debated. In reality, Nietzsche was never a big proponent of nationalism, and in fact he greatly opposed the big state and nationalism. Any references to his work from the Nazis were extremely superficial. Hitler read very little of his work and even professed that he had no use for Nietzsche's complex ideas. Nietzsche's philosophy was non-racial, and he vehemently opposed the growing anti-Semitism in Germany. He even refused to go to his sister's wedding because she was engaged to an anti-Semite. Nietzsche was also deeply troubled by his friend and composer Richard Wagner's antagonism towards Jews. In 1889, Nietzsche collapsed trying to defend a horse from being whipped. He became an invalid for the remaining 11 years of his life. His sister, first from a failed Aryan colony, took care of him and looked after his body of work. She published a book from his scattered writings called The Will to Power. Its status among Nietzsche's text is somewhat questionable, since someone with an ideological agenda put it together. But there are plenty of consistencies with Nietzsche's other work to warrant consideration. Another core value of Nietzsche is his commitment to truthfulness. If we're to affirm life in its entirety, we have to be honest about it. We shouldn't be satisfied by a notion of truth simply because it makes us feel a certain way or has a practical benefit. Nietzsche was critical of the Christian apologetic argument that claims that since Christianity can make us feel good, it must be true. Few would accuse Nietzsche of not being boldly honest. His writing is often slanderous and scathing in critique. Few people in this world have thrown such scathing words towards priests as Nietzsche. He even accused them of exercising their dominion over others for satisfaction, while guilting Christians for harboring the same sinful desires. At the same time, Nietzsche warns that an unconditional devotion to the truth can harm the values that make life worth living. Too much honesty about the world can lead to nausea and suicide. You can see how he always tried to avoid the pit of nihilism in his work. Our demands for truth can also be never fully satisfied. We're cognitively limited and are prone to delusion and error. We have to be satisfied with appearances over objective knowledge. Nietzsche believed art could work as a goodwill to appearance to alleviate the burden of honesty. It can make the breath of life beautiful even when it's painful. He encourages a level of illusion to make affirming life more palatable. Knowledge kills action, for action requires a state of being in which we are covered with the veil of illusion. If Nietzsche's value of truthfulness in art as unnecessary illusion seems like contradictions, that's because, well, they are. Nietzsche's values don't work as a perfect system, which can confuse readers of his work. But it all makes a bit more sense if you consider another important value of his: pluralism. According to Nietzsche, we only have perspectives on truth. But to make our best attempts at knowledge, we need to be able to use different outlooks, values, and perspectives to evaluate something. The more eyes, different eyes, we know how to bring to bear on one and the same matter, that much more complete will our concept of this matter, our objectivity, be. In this way, having multiple competing values would help one find a superior way to evaluate things in life. Understanding Nietzsche's values in this way makes sense. They support each other but also oppose and limit each other. His value of affirmation supports his value of life and power. To affirm all of our existence, we need to acknowledge our desire for power. However, his value of honesty runs into limitations when considering that we need useful illusions to avoid nihilism. While Nietzsche's values were important to him, he never wanted them to be adopted the way a student adopts facts. He wanted his followers to create themselves and their own values. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the prophet Zarathustra is greatly disappointed when his followers simply adopt his teachings. He offers this departing advice: "Now I go alone, my disciples, you too go now alone. Thus I wanted. Go away from me and resist Zarathustra, and even better, be ashamed of him. Perhaps he deceived you. One pays a teacher badly if one always remains nothing but a pupil. Now I bid you to lose me and find yourselves. And only then, when you have all denied me, will I return to you, that I may celebrate the great noon with you." He wanted us to create values like artists making art. Despite the case he makes for his own, it's unlikely he thought value creation should end with him. Nietzsche encouraged people to be free spirits, to embrace self-determination, and to reject committing to the values of others. However, Nietzsche clarifies that individuality alone doesn't give someone value. A person has to work on value creation and self-governance. not just on being unique. Nietzsche believed you should give yourself laws to follow and exercise self-control based on them. Most importantly, you shouldn't blindly follow and worship the values of others. Fanaticism is the opposite of what Nietzsche had in mind. Nietzsche routinely described higher and lower types in his work. The higher ones are people like Napoleon and the writer Goethe, who he believed were able to achieve an excellence and live without the constraints of traditional morality or slave morality. They have a psychophysical makeup that enables them to pursue greatness. Importantly, they were autonomous in nature, exuding qualities of a free spirit. These higher types could commit all of themselves to a greater purpose of their own design. They weren't perfect examples of what Nietzsche values, nor should they be. Of Nietzsche's examples of higher types, most were artists and intellectuals. Napoleon is the only example of a person who pursued the domination of others through war. The lower types are those who slavishly obey traditional values and seek to bring the higher types down to their level. They are weaker individuals, by comparison, resenting anyone who embodies excellence and a free spirit. Nietzsche didn't imply that these types could be divided based on race or class, but could be recognized by key traits. The traits aren't mutually exclusive. Nietzsche insists many individuals have both higher and lower traits. There's a strong element of determinism in Nietzsche's writing. Being born a higher type is described a bit like winning the genetic lottery, but again, it's not race-based. He also criticized the idea that we're in full control of our actions as implied by the Christian doctrine. It's a source of debate whether Nietzsche was a hard determinist or believed in some freedom of will. He does seem to imply that our wills are determined to be weak or strong, but a will that is not free at all would undermine his notion of creating yourself. This could be an example of Nietzsche deploying different perspectives to better understand the will. He may also have held a more deterministic position earlier in his writing and less so later on. In Beyond Good and Evil, he criticizes hard determinism for making the weak-willed worse off. While Nietzsche admired the higher types, he didn't think just anyone should pursue greatness. If people are content with being Christian, he suggests they may as well stay that way. Some scholars believe that Nietzsche wrote about Christianity in such an incendiary way to discourage believers in God from even considering his work. Nietzsche's writing is for those who look into the abyss of nihilism and need help pursuing meaning despite it. His work is intended to solve a crisis of nihilism after all, not to convince people that God doesn't exist. Nietzsche never laid out a political program or aligned himself with ideology. There were clues, however, to his political leaning. He wasn't an egalitarian and wasn't a proponent of a democracy. He appreciated the competitive spirit of the Greeks before Plato, which fostered a healthy spirit of striving for greatness. He describes great festivals of music, tragedy, and athletic contests. There was competition, hierarchies, and a level of ingenuity that Nietzsche appreciated. His description is part history, part myth, but most importantly, it exemplifies a world that allowed great humans to rise. Nietzsche did clarify that he didn't think the Greeks should be taken as a political paradigm for the future. He resisted developing that kind of a political program. Insisting on a political position would defeat the purpose of Nietzsche's philosophical aims. He wanted to lead people from nihilism to pursue meaning in overcoming oneself and creating new values. Deciding those values for you would undercut our pursuit of meaning. Just as he wanted great people to be able to rise, he didn't want to tell them exactly what to become. That's why his descriptions of people he admires as higher types aren't very specific. Nietzsche was also concerned that people might use his authority as an author to give rise to disaster, and to some extent that has been the case. Nazis borrow bits and pieces from his work superficially to bolster their justification of war, domination, and racial superiority. Writing in an obtuse fashion like he did carries a real risk. Most of his books comprise aphorisms, which are short, punchy, disconnected paragraphs. He was very hard to interpret by any standard, and after a century of unpacking his body of work, scholars still have plenty of disagreements over what he truly intended. It's probably expecting too much of your average reader to see Nietzsche's values in the proper light, even if such a feat has been achieved. People are prone to taking a profound idea as if they were the word of God. You could say it's psychologically ingrained in many of us. His approach was a bit reckless in hindsight, but then his project of inspiring you to create your own values seems to depend on this ambiguity. It almost seems necessary. If he had been more concise in making this point, people would have taken his word as law and would no longer strive to create their own morality. And while willful misinterpretations of his work likely contributed in a small way to the rise of Nazism, more thoughtful interpretations had a big influence on psychology, sociology, philosophy, and the arts. Nietzsche's work greatly influenced well-known psychologists Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. Freud likely borrowed from the ideas of repression in the unconscious mind that Nietzsche explored in The Gay Science. Man thinks continually without knowing it. The thinking that rises to consciousness is only the smallest part of all of this. Freud denied having read any Nietzsche, but a strong paper trail of correspondence and interviews suggests otherwise. I can think of a few Nietzschean values Freud undermined with this calculated move, and a couple he would have affirmed. Psychologist Alfred Adler developed an individual psychology that was heavily influenced by Nietzsche's values of self-creation and striving. In modern psychology, it's now referred to as self-actualization, which you're probably pretty familiar with. Nietzsche also greatly influenced postmodernism, as expressed by philosophers Jacques Derrida and Michel Foucault. Existentialist philosophers who followed Nietzsche, like Heidegger and Albert Camus, often drew on Nietzsche in their work. Like Nietzsche believed we needed to create values to avoid nihilism, Camus thought we should always try to create meaning in our lives despite life's inherent meaninglessness. Nietzsche's influences can also be found in the works of countless authors like Hermann Hesse, Knut Hamsun, and Eugene O'Neill. And let's not forget that he did help us think more deeply about how to move on from God and the values of slave morality. Did the belief in God truly die? No, God is obviously still around, as Nietzsche himself predicted. God is dead, but given the way of men, there may still be caves for thousands of years in which his shadow will be shown. And we have to vanquish his shadow too. But thanks in part to Nietzsche, a wider variety of values has become more commonplace in society. The values of self-creation and rejecting societal norms are very popular, to whatever extent you can credit Nietzsche for them. And we're a bit more accepting of excellence for better or worse. After seeing the influence of his work, do you think Nietzsche would affirm the world he had a part in shaping? I like to think he would, because what happened is necessary. If he were as strong as his philosophy, he would allow it to happen over and over again for eternity. Precisely the same way. The internet is dead and we are the killers. Truth doesn't really exist online anymore. Bots have swamped social media with misinformation, and the web pages we surf today are almost entirely generated by AI. Even YouTube is flooded with channels completely run by AI with zero creative input from humans. Every single day, less and less of the content we consume is created by humans, and what's even worse is that all of it is being recycled back into a system that we have very little control over, leaving the internet a shell of what it once was. Scrolling through social media has become an isolated, empty, and fruitless activity. But how exactly did we get here, and is it too late to revive it? The internet started as a weapon of war, not an explicit military war, but a technological battle during the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. This pushed American researchers to develop a way of sharing data and programs through a global dispersed network beginning in the early 1960s. The earliest version of the internet created two universities, the University of California and Stanford. Simple messages could be communicated between them, but it was nothing like what we have today. Throughout the 1970s, though, that network continued spreading via the use of phone lines. In 1983, there were only 500 computer hosts connected. Within 5 years, that reached 100,000, rolling out to increasingly more countries. Then, everything changed with the creation of the World Wide Web. The World Wide Web was a simple concept. It was a network of hypertext documents accessed with a program called a browser. By the mid-1990s, it had moved from scientists and governments into the realm of public consumption. The birth of the internet was celebrated as a revolutionary force. With the free transfer and democracy of information, power could be put back in the hands of the people. The borders of regulation and nationalism would be transcended, creating a new age of society. You no longer needed a media or a political platform to air your views. Everyone could become their own publisher, something that wasn't possible before. There was only one problem: greed. As years turned to decades, the internet followed a familiar path, the same one almost every other important technological innovation did before and will keep doing. Dozens of internet service providers had emerged, but they slowly began merging into just a few big companies, leaving consumers with no real choice. Just like with radio a century earlier, thousands of different companies were slowly bought or priced out of the market. This was true for both the infrastructure and the web real estate. By 2001, when the dot-com bubble popped, the top 10 websites made up 31% of page views in the United States. And by 2006, that number climbed to 40% and then 75% in 2010. At the same time, iPhones and smart devices changed our relationship with the internet. Browsing the World Wide Web became less common as people shifted to semi-closed applications, and in 2010, these applications accounted for less than a quarter of internet traffic. Today, it's 90%. Keeping users inside the confines of applications made advertising more effective. Having created an entirely new ecosystem, Apple was on its way to becoming one of the biggest companies in the world thanks to this closed system. After the dot-com bubble popped, only 5 tech companies were able to survive and thrive: Google, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Microsoft. The big 5 are now virtually impossible to avoid on the internet, whether through advertising, e-commerce, or the cloud computing hosts that websites depend on. This tech dominance has permanently changed our society, and as these industry giants compete in a technological arms race for the next big weapon to sell consumers, that being artificial intelligence, the last vestiges of a utopian internet could be lost: connection and truth. Nearly 5.5 billion people have access to the internet, and the average user spends 6 hours a day online. It's by far the world's biggest market, and unfortunately, the most valuable commodity in that market is your attention. Views, likes, and reviews are worth their weight in gold, and this has led to a huge shady marketplace for all kinds of engagement. Money has turned the internet into a tiered system, ripe for exploitation. Creating a successful channel or social media profile can be a lucrative long-term investment. With a few clicks and dollars, anyone can buy thousands of Spotify streams, Instagram likes, or YouTube views. How can companies offer these services? Well, employing thousands of people to click on posts manually would be far too expensive. Instead, they use bots, automated, unattended software. When set on a target, they artificially engage with the post, boost it in the rankings, and attract more attention. Websites do their best to scrub bots out, but it's almost impossible to remove them all. Over the last 6 years, Meta deactivated over 27 billion fake accounts. Some believe it's already too late to take action against bots. They think we may have reached a dark tipping point. First posted in 2019, the Dead Internet Theory proposes that we're living in a dystopian ghost town populated by simulated actors. According to the theory, something changed around 2016. The internet had become so saturated by automated content that having a genuine human-to-human interaction was rare, if not impossible. Surfing the web was like driving alone and only passing automated vehicles on the road. The theory's original poster admitted that it sounded conspiratorial, but they were certain of a feeling that something was distinctly lacking. There was an emptiness online that hadn't been there in the early 2000s. Images, conversations, and memes all began to resemble one another, while forms that were once exciting now felt sanitized. This was all supposedly all carefully curated to keep control of culture and political power, and most of all, to make sure that the general population stays in line. The Dead Internet Theory remained on the fringes until 2022, when a grand unveiling brought the issue of bots to global attention. On November 30th, 2022, the world was introduced to ChatGPT. Built on a large language model that processes gigantic datasets and forms relationships between ideas, it is the most advanced form of artificial intelligence ever to exist. For decades, computers have been much more powerful than humans at specific tasks, like chess or mathematical calculation. The question that divided computer scientists and philosophers was whether or not computers could ever transition into a kind of general intelligence. Mathematician Alan Turing asked this question in 1950. He developed the Turing test as a way to determine whether a machine was thinking. The test was simple. For a computer to pass, it has to fool a human into thinking they're talking with another human. Last year, ChatGPT-4 became one of the first to pass the Turing test. We had officially brought a machine to life, and suddenly the Dead Internet Theory became not just a conspiracy, but a likely future. And if we can't distinguish between humans and AI anymore, who can we trust? Consider this. 49.6% of all internet traffic in 2023 came from bots. Even more daunting is that things are likely to get much worse. Now that search engines have started to integrate AI technology like ChatGPT into their services, the flaws have never been more clear. Tech giants are rushing products to the market to compete with each other for supremacy. In the process, there have been some disastrous results. Google's entry into the world of AI, Gemini, told users that rocks are a source of vitamins. Astronauts who landed on the moon encountered cats. Backpacks are just as effective as parachutes when jumping out of a plane. These tech-fueled hallucinations come from them trying to piece together gigantic amounts of information that have been compressed, and they do this with an algorithm that identifies the important components and interpolates the missing pieces. Anything creative is usually generated using a composition or altered version of work that has already been created by humans. Artwork and music online are being used as training data for artificial intelligence, leading to many arguing that workers are being exploited. Hundreds of artists backed by the nonprofit Artists' Rights Alliance have signed an open letter seeking to prevent AI from sabotaging and undermining artists. On top of that, these models don't know how to judge whether or not a source is trustworthy. Instead, they gravitate towards popular responses, which can range from reliable academic journals to a meme made by a 17-year-old to gain Reddit karma. One individual created a fake website designed purely to trap crawlers. These are automated programs commonly used by search engines to systematically download the contents of web pages. They realized that the GPT bot was collecting around 3 million pages from their sites every day. This was a small window into the quality of data that is being scraped by chatbot AIs and forming their responses, which isn't exactly a positive sign. What's even worse is that because so much of the internet is already generative AI, the next generation of AI will use content created by the previous generations as training datasets, and with each passing generation, the work these AI tools produce will continue to be less and less human. Search results will be filled with AI-generated content, and finding trustworthy sources will become even more difficult. The word robot was first used in a 1920 Czech science fiction play called Rossum's Universal Robot. It comes from the Czech word robota, which loosely translates to slave. This was a good description of mechanical robots used in production. They were simply tools like a hammer or a calculator. As robots moved into the digital world, though, the relationship between master and slave has been blurred. Online media is already largely controlled by artificial intelligence. Powerful automated programs determine whether content succeeds or fails. Advertisers pay millions for professionals to crack the code of mysterious algorithms. Because they're constantly changing, these programs essentially create a secretive inner functionality process not even known to those who design it. Left at the mercy of pattern recognizing supercomputers, our behavior has been shaped around them. Social media sites have shifted from authentic social engagement to prioritizing consumption-driven models. As long as they can keep you online, it's good for business. While there, algorithms process unimaginably large datasets to create profiles of you as a consumer, categorizing your online behavior to create personalized ads. All it takes is a single click to fill your feed with a certain subject, pulling you in to consume more. The system rewards copycats and imitators who observe successful content, and they have no choice. To survive, online creators, influencers, and marketers must constantly seek the algorithm's approval. In the end, even the humans who create are forced to create generic, unoriginal content. And there's a reason people are complaining about the Mr. Beastification of YouTube. But who can you blame? When a creator feels like the only way they can succeed is to appease the almighty algorithm and they see how well Jimmy Donaldson does that, why shouldn't they copy him? As Friedrich Nietzsche argued, people tend to follow the herd for protection, afraid to show authenticity and confront truth. With this comes nihilism, where the herd drifts aimlessly without meaning or certainty. That is reflected in the algorithm. The content we consume and perpetuate leaves us in an infinite cycle of emptiness. Our aesthetics and values are now curated by non-human forces. So is our culture still ours? Are humans the ones giving the orders, or has technology become our master? The commercialization of the internet, the concentration of a handful of companies, and the creation of a quick but dangerously inaccurate generative tool have given us a technology that is manipulating our deepest weaknesses. The emergence of bot armies offers a shortcut for business development. AI offers a shortcut to creativity for low-quality content production. Powerful algorithms have fueled our addiction to short-form content. Has the internet become a carefully constructed reality we've all been presented with? Not to the extent that the dead internet theory describes, but as artificial intelligence spreads through the internet, our sense of reality is being seriously shaken. It's a wake-up call to change course before it's too late. To keep the internet alive, we need the courage to break away from the herd, acknowledge that the current systems aren't working, and that humanity is more important than profit. If you like the videos we make and would love to support us to make bigger and better projects, we just updated the Patreon. Everyone who joins will get free access to our updated Discord server, where you can connect with the Aperture community. Patrons can choose from different tiers with perks like discounts on all the merch we have and will create in the future, private Discord channels for voting power on video topics and idea pitching, shoutouts in video descriptions, and more perks to come that will be decided by you guys, the patrons. If you don't have the means, then please don't feel obligated in any way. Subscribing and watching the videos is more than enough support. But if you do have the means and want to support, then Patreon is the best way to do so. The link is in the description. Thanks for watching. In some of the most popular films, writers will often use a point of no return to force their main character into action. It's a point in the story where the protagonist can't return to their former life without going through trials that bring into question who they are and what they're capable of. It's a great device for driving a narrative to a satisfying conclusion, but is humanity ready for its point of no return? For an individual, it's a challenge to overcome so that they can return to their daily lives. But for humankind, it's a new, more dangerous world, and there is no going back to the way things were once we cross that threshold. Our point of no return is a major climate tipping point. If we don't significantly curb our greenhouse gas emissions by 2035, we won't be able to prevent a 2 degrees Celsius rise in global temperatures, and that might not sound so terrible at first glance, but that increase will create far-reaching disasters that we're not prepared for. We will be entering a more dangerous world that threatens the majority of life on Earth. It's a world with deadly heat waves, massive flooding along coastlines, and extreme storms. Entire ecosystems will be lost. Countless species will go extinct. It's the point where our daily life is disrupted so often that government bodies won't be able to keep up, and society as we know it may start to collapse. The question most of us keep shouting into the ether is, why can't we stop catastrophe? With all the technological advances we've made and climate research at our disposal, why are we driving life on Earth to a mass extinction? The answer is complicated, but there are a few obvious culprits. The influence of the oil and gas industry is staggering. For decades, the fossil fuel industry has spread misinformation or intentionally guided us to unrealistic climate solutions. Governments have been too vulnerable to lobbyists to tackle climate change in any serious way. And of course, working against us is the basic fact that such a large-scale change requires a level of cooperation among nations that hasn't existed to date. And then there's greenwashing. To boost their corporate image, companies will advertise how environmentally friendly they are, while their actual efforts do little to impact our climate goals. 2035 is the point of no return. But why? The specific date is somewhat arbitrary. It's a deadline chosen based on climate data and findings intended to provoke immediate action. The idea is that we need to reduce global emissions by 60% by that date to avoid a 2-degree rise in temperature and the catastrophic consequences that will unfold as a result. By 2030, we need a 43% reduction, while also lowering methane emissions by 1/3. It's all a part of a greater goal to reach net zero by 2050. This would lead us to a 1.5-degree increase in temperature globally. These assessments aren't guaranteed, however. Climate scientists are dealing with probabilities, and it's still very possible that the current plan for reducing emissions could result in a higher than expected increase in temperature. Earth is complex. It's composed of many different systems that are beyond our ability to fully predict. All we can do is make informed estimations, which is all the more reason to take action as urgently as possible. The consequences of doing nothing, or not enough, will impact you and everyone you know. They will be fatal for many and disastrous for others. The most direct impact to humanity is an increase in temperatures leading to a rapid rise in heat-related deaths. Entire regions will soon become incapable of supporting human life for long stretches. Even the exposure to prolonged heat can have a negative effect on people. Car crashes rise while test scores lower. We sleep worse and chronic conditions are exacerbated. Pregnant women are more likely to have stillbirths, and violence increases in all its manifestations. Coastal areas will increasingly become flooded by storm surges, and sea levels will rise as many of the world's largest cities are completely submerged by ocean water. 37% of the world's population lives within 62 miles of a coast. In the United States alone, the lives of 3 million people will be disrupted on a monthly basis by flooding. Whether that's their homes or power facilities, rising tides will make life increasingly unbearable along the coast. The total cost from climate change in general is estimated to be $38 trillion a year by halfway through the century, if not enough is done to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The more obvious impacts of climate change will also have cascading effects. We will soon lose entire ecosystems, starting with Arctic and mountain zones. These systems fall apart when one source of food is disrupted. In the Arctic, melting sea ice will cause a decline in the abundance of algae. Zooplankton feed off of this plant and their population will drop as a consequence. This impact will continue down the food chain to cod, seals, and polar bears. Our species is also very vulnerable to a rise in global temperatures. Droughts are already causing problems for our global food supply, which will only get worse without intervention. Food shortages will often lead to mass starvation and large-scale human migration. As these disruptions continue, political instability rises. When billions are displaced and food is scarce, society begins to crumble. This is where the world starts to become apocalyptic in nature. You're probably familiar with the Gulf Stream. It's a strong ocean current that delivers warm water from the Gulf of Mexico past the eastern regions of North America and spreads all the way to Western Europe. The Gulf Stream keeps much of the southeastern United States warmer in the winter and cooler in the summer. It's also what makes England warmer than regions of a similar distance to the equator as colder areas in Canada. As Greenland's ice caps continue to melt, the resulting massive influx of fresh water will weaken the Gulf Stream until it eventually collapses. The consequences of this disruption are hard to fathom. Sea levels would rise quickly in North America, temperatures would drop in Europe, rainfall that billions of people depend on for growing food would be diminished, and storms would increase in frequency. If climate emissions aren't dramatically cut, a controversial 2023 study published in Nature Communications outlined how the Gulf Stream could collapse by 2095. Perhaps the biggest challenges with climate change aren't the predictable outcomes, but the unforeseen consequences. Earth is composed of complicated and interconnected systems, and as we disrupt any one of them, we cause a change in many others. The Gulf Stream collapse, for example, could intensify El Niño in the southern hemisphere. This is the world's most powerful weather pattern. Its heat will grow with even greater intensity, and thunderstorms will occur with more frequency. There's an unfathomable amount of potential consequences that could devastate life on Earth. So why exactly are we doing so little to prevent global disaster? There's a lot of money invested in spewing carbon emissions into the atmosphere. Scientists working for ExxonMobil, a $500 billion company synonymous with fossil fuels, eerily predicted global warming in the late 1970s. The entire fossil fuel industry has taken many approaches to prevent industry intervention by government bodies. Oil and gas companies put a lot of money into discrediting climate change, from buying news coverage to intensely lobbying politicians. Global warming became a partisan issue, with right-leaning parties siding with big oil and center-left parties acknowledging the problem, while doing little to help the cause. So far, few governments have been willing to upset those who profit from emissions. But the reality of climate change has become undeniable as forest fires rage out of control as a seasonal event, especially in North and South America. Last year alone, Canada lost over 44 million acres to flames. Fossil fuel companies have adapted to the new reality of the climate catastrophe by changing their strategy. Instead of outright denial, the oil and gas sector is emphasizing carbon capture technology. Rather than cutting oil and gas production, nations around the world simply pull carbon emissions out of the atmosphere. The glaring problem is that even a robust rollout of this technology, working as envisioned, would only scratch the surface of our emissions output. The vast majority of carbon capture projects have failed to get off the ground despite governments approving $20 billion of public funding and $200 billion earmarked for the future. To power the capture facilities needed to limit climate change to 1.5 degrees, we would need 26,000 terawatt hours of electricity generation, which is more than the global electricity demand in 2022. The investment needed in the required rollout of technology is currently not even remotely feasible. And even worse, 3/4 of the current capture projects insert the carbon back into the ground to improve oil and gas recovery in oil fields. They're essentially just another way of extracting more fossil fuels. These projects also pose a great risk to the people living around them. Leaks not only harm anyone in the area, but also release a highly concentrated quantity of carbon emissions into the atmosphere. And so far, there are plenty of examples of leaks occurring. In one case, the Sleipner storage site in Norway leaked captured carbon into a geological layer, raising concerns over how that could impact the region. These carbon capture projects are also used by some governments to justify the expansion of fossil fuel extraction. The emissions that are taken out of the atmosphere just inspire more oil and gas production. Carbon capture is a pipe dream. While this technology might play some role in the fight against climate change, positioning it as a primary strategy will be disastrous. Programs like carbon offsetting also have similar issues. They justify the use of fossil fuels by asking people to offset their emissions with a donation. These contributions supposedly support climate-friendly projects. However, these initiatives rarely offset the equivalent amount of carbon emissions and often do nothing. Developers who receive incentives from these programs can generate carbon credits without making any changes at all. If they cut down less trees than expected, they can be awarded more carbon credits. But these developers often just cut down less trees anyway if it suits a particular project. They just have to do better than a very low standard. It's what some would call a racket. This isn't to suggest that all of these projects are unhelpful, but that most of these carbon credit systems don't help prevent climate change in any significant way. The truth is you can't offset your emissions so easily. They need to be reduced, but is humanity up to honestly fighting climate change? A lot of data cited in this video has come from climate scientists where it is relevant. In a recent survey, leading climate scientists expressed doubt about our ability to prevent global temperatures from rising to catastrophic levels. Many believed we have a semi-dystopian future ahead filled with mass migration, famine, war, wildfires, and other disasters. We still have a path forward to mitigate emissions in a rising global temperature. The two largest sectors contributing to global emissions are electricity production and transportation. We already have potential solutions for these sources of pollution. Renewable energy is not only readily available, but has been getting cheaper quickly and spreading fast. Wind, solar, and hydropower generation are a reality now. The transition to renewable energy will also help reduce the emissions from another evolving innovation in transportation: electric cars. While EVs aren't a perfect solution for fighting climate change, they could reduce our overall carbon output substantially. An electric vehicle powered by a clean grid is responsible for 13 tons of CO2 emissions over its lifetime. By comparison, a gas-powered vehicle contributes 80 tons of CO2. The emissions involved in EV production is bound to decrease over time as battery technology improves. To reach our net zero goal, we are actually ahead of targets when it comes to solar energy and closing in on the battery production required for EVs and stationary battery usage. Wind energy and heat pump are lagging behind, but overall, we are making progress. If we manage to cut our emissions early, we buy more time to reduce our overall emissions. And that's time we desperately need. I am sorry. Those were the words uttered by Asa Raskin, the creator of the Infinite Scroll, after realizing his invention destroyed billions of people around the world. This one simple feature turned us into addicts. Is it too late for us to stop doom scrolling? If you've ever felt this searing pain going up your arm at the end of a long day, it's most likely caused by an inflamed tendon that runs along the inside of your hand and forearm. And of the most likely causes of this inflation is infinite scrolling. Like any other muscle, tissue, or joint in our body, the muscles in our hands and arms can get aggravated with overuse. The repetitive, constant motion of scrolling might not be some grand act of athleticism. Still, considering how much time we spend swiping our thumb or finger up and down, it's no surprise that many have developed this pain from overuse. And it's not just our bodies feeling the effects of infinite scrolling, we're increasingly isolated, anxious, and addicted, as we're bombarded with endless content that, for the most part, isn't improving our lives. Almost none of us can say we haven't felt negatively affected by a post or a video we've seen on social media. It's impossible to avoid. So how did we get here, and how did the infinite scroll become so ubiquitous in modern life? How does it keep us so engaged, and do we have any hope of escaping it? Humans weren't made to sit and stare at screens all day. Our ancestors were always on the move, running, jumping, and hunting. That's why I love the Olympics. It's a celebration of our natural athletic spirit. In ancient Egypt, scrolls were physical papers that were dramatically unfurled, revealing paintings and writings meant to enrich society. These scrolls, which were used for centuries, were finite, singular items that expressed specific ideas. That finality is exactly what the concept of infinite scrolling has eliminated. Despite the lingering pain you might feel in your forearm, scrolling has also taken the physical act out of being on the internet. In the days of the desktop computer, we needed our whole body to scroll. We had to sit in a chair and use all our fingers to type and move one hand to the mouse. The early days of being online had athletic terms like surfing. They hinted at some sort of deep, active exploration of the internet. And then the screens shrank. The devices shrank. We could have the experience of being online without moving anything but a single finger. With the invention of infinite scrolling, the adventurous nature of being online started disappearing. It became a passive activity rather than an active exploration. Now it's less like surfing and more like exposure therapy. We're stuck in place with our eyes locked on the screen, and we can't pull ourselves away to experience the actual world around us. The inventor of the infinite scroll, web designer Asa Raskin, has now made a second career out of his regret for inventing it back in 2006. While the passive activity might feel good in the moment, it's hard to argue that it is good. Of course, there are important, educational, and amazing things to learn on the internet and social media. There's communities to be found and skills to be taught, but the endlessness of it all has made us slaves to the algorithm instead of curious, intentional users. Scrolling has become a key element of our digital lives, so much so that we sometimes don't even realize we're doing it. How many times have you picked up your phone and, seemingly without realizing it, ended up 20 scrolls deep on TikTok? Scrolling is so second nature that it's not even an intentional act. Instead, it's how we spend our passive time. The mega corporations behind all the popular social media platforms wouldn't want it any other way. Our instinctive behavior to scroll reinforces their algorithms and has created an entire economy built on our attention spans. If we stay hooked on our phones longer, we present more opportunities to advertisers to sell us things, and therefore more opportunities for large tech companies to make money. The infinite scroll makes this cycle all but certain. Human brains have adapted to consume what's in front of us. It's not just puppy videos and vacation pics that keep us returning for more. In a 2005 study, researchers presented participants with bowls of soup connected to a tube that would automatically refill the bowl. The participants ate 70% more soup than others with normal bowls without even noticing. You can think of infinite scrolling like that tube at the bottom of the bowl, constantly there to refill our brain with a soup seasoned with content without us even realizing it. Tech companies have hijacked our brains and gotten us hooked on their products by tapping into our reward system. The brain's reward system produces dopamine, a neurotransmitter known as the feel-good hormone. When we're hit with a shot of dopamine, we feel excited, elated, and motivated. We need dopamine to be productive, to feel creative, and to get out of bed. But social media triggers a massive and quick release of dopamine that makes us feel like we're on a high. Normal dopamine levels help us get through our day and are often released at a slow, steady pace. These big spikes in dopamine that we experience when someone likes a photo we've posted or discovers a video that excites us can be deceiving. They trick us into thinking we will only feel good if we keep getting those big spikes. And that is called addiction. You might have felt something like this if you've ever parted ways with your phone for a day or even an hour. When we're disconnected from that addicting infinite scroll, our brain releases the stress hormone, cortisol, because it's not getting the intense hits of dopamine that it's used to. Our neural pathways are used to feeling activated, and suddenly they're stripped of that feeling. For some of us, this can happen with merely a few minutes away from social media. But if you can last a day, you might start to feel your heart rate increase, your blood pressure jump, or anxiety set in. The lack of reward you've been promised by endless scrolling on social media is hitting you, and you feel deprived as the stimulus has been removed. This reaction, or rather craving, is exactly how social media companies keep us using their platforms, even in the face of our own unhappiness. Social media takes human connection and turns it into a drug. When we interact with social media, our brains light up in the same way as when we take drugs or drink alcohol. However, this drug on our phones that we can endlessly scroll through is available 24/7. The algorithm learns what we like and pushes us towards content we didn't even know we wanted. Our brain on the drug of social media isn't a brain that's sustainable. One way to know if the infinite scroll has trapped you in its fangs is by tracking the 3 C's. The first is control. Are you able to control your consumption and retain a sense of autonomy over your decisions when it comes to phone and social media use? The next is compulsion. Do you feel yourself regularly reaching for your phone, aimlessly scrolling just to feel like your mood is regulated? Have you become dependent on it to feel normal? And the third C is consequences. Are you suffering consequences in your actual life because of your social media use? Have you isolated yourself from friends and family or noticed emerging struggles with your mental health? If any of the C's apply to you, then it might be time to reassess your relationship with the infinite scroll. Even Asa Raskin says his goal was to create a seamless user experience, but he didn't foresee the consequences. He admits that the goal of the infinite scroll wasn't to help the user, but to keep the user online for as long as possible. He also acknowledges its contribution to rising rates of social media and smartphone addiction. "I regret that I didn't think more about how this thing would be used," he told London-based The Times in 2019. Like many of us, Raskin senses the dangers of the infinite scroll, and there's a lot of them. Endless content on social media reinforces negative thoughts and feelings. If we feel depressed or anxious, we have a tendency to seek out news or information that will confirm those feelings, leaving us in a harmful cycle of negative reinforcement. It can also worsen any existing mental health struggles we're having, whether it's other people's cute photos with their partner that make us jealous, or someone expressing their own sadness that reminds us of our own, or a clickbait post filled with anger. We're susceptible to falling deeper down the hole we're already trying to climb out of. These symptoms might include panic or worry, especially when it comes to the way we consume news on social media. Scrolling through catastrophe after catastrophe and hot take after hot take leads to a dark rumination of how upsetting the world is. Yes, sometimes positivity makes it to your feed, but we all know that negative and extreme content is what gets clicks. Once this sets in, you might notice that you struggle with sleeping. So many of us scroll right before bed, even though we know it's not good for us. We sit slack-jawed, our faces illuminated by the screen a few inches away from our eyes, sinking deeper and deeper into the depths of content, and without us even knowing, this can increase our anxiety at the very exact time we're supposed to be relaxing. Poor sleep can in turn increase stress and other mental health issues, so even if the content itself isn't upsetting you, the mere fact of looking at it before you go to bed can have adverse effects. Not to mention that an endless supply of information presents us with so many conflicting ideas, moods, and advice that we're left uneasy when we do manage to put down our devices. There are very many opinions in the world, and to try and understand them in bite-sized servings on social media is a recipe for confusion and anxiety. Even as some sites have taken measures to reduce false news posts, it isn't always about whether the information is true or not, it's that there's so much of it. We're forced to wade through a sea of opinions, ideas, facts, lies, and perspectives, and it's impossible to sort out what we actually believe. If you take a step back from the infinite scroll of information and think about your own values outside of what everyone on the internet is saying, you probably could come up with a pretty good line of reasoning. But the moment you throw other people's posts into the mix, your independent mind is shut off. The irony is that we know it's bad for us. We scroll through articles about how we can't stop scrolling. You're watching a video on one now. We don't sit down and think, I'm gonna spend 30 minutes on Instagram right now. We sit down to watch one video or search for one thing, and then you just don't really stop. The Harvard Business Review conducted a study in 2022 with 6,445 US students and working adults and identified 3 factors influencing whether people choose to keep looking at content rather than switch to another activity. The first was the amount of media already viewed. Would the rabbit hole grow stronger once people already viewed a lot of content? In theory, one might think that if you watch a bunch of videos, you'll become bored, but the opposite is true. In the study, those who watched 5 videos instead of 1 were 10% more likely to watch more. Another factor that keeps us hooked is the similarity of the media we view. When presented with the option of watching more videos on the same topic as the ones they'd already watched, participants were 21% more likely to stick with these related videos than the participants who were told they could watch videos on another topic. Lastly, a deciding factor in addition to the content consumption is how we view that content. Unsurprisingly, uninterrupted video consumption made users 22% more likely to watch another video than those who had alternated between work tasks and videos. The infinite scroll holds the key to all 3 of these factors. They all increase with media accessibility and repetition. When something feels accessible, it becomes easier to process, and we anticipate that we'll enjoy it more. That's dopamine at work. Even if going down that content rabbit hole is at odds with what we actually want to be doing, we just can't help ourselves. The apps we use are in the driver's seat. They're designed to trap users in an infinite supply of content, making it easy to consume several posts and videos in a row, suggesting similar content and automatically start playing the next video without interruption. They fit all of the criteria to keep us addicted and away from our real lives. There's a lot of discussion in recent years about flow state. A flow state happens when we're immersed in an action that's both rewarding and challenging at the same time. All the while, we feel a sense of flow that keeps us engaged. Usually the flow is a good thing. It might help us stay fit or creative, or it can be the key to staying on task with work. However, regarding social media, the flow state is not where we want to live. A 2023 Baylor University study looked at 200 Instagram and TikTok users over the age of 18 and measured their time spent on the apps. They were asked about 5 aspects of their experience, specifically focused attention, enjoyment, curiosity, telepresence, and time distortion. All of these elements we want to achieve if we're finding a flow state, but the study found that they also exist when we use social media. If we are so immersed in content that we can't step out of it and redirect our attention, then we're in trouble. The invention and proliferation of the infinite scroll have not only made us addicted to our devices, but they've also swelled into real danger in the world around us. You can look at the global political landscape. When social media became a major part of political organizing, fundraising, and commentary, we were siloed into echo chambers that reaffirmed our pre-existing views. We also began the aptly named doom scrolling obsessively, looking for the most enraging, distressing posts that would work us into a frenzy, and the trend hasn't slowed down. Endless scrolling makes it impossible to step away from the bad news, and this tendency to continue looking at something that upsets us can have physical and mental effects. At no point in modern history was doom scrolling more pervasive than during the height of COVID. We were confronted with bad news every single day, which dug us deeper into our own echo chambers and turned us against one another from the isolation of our own homes. While COVID was undoubtedly a dangerous and dark time for the planet, the feelings of dread and living on high alert have lingered. Constant doom scrolling can develop into obsessively checking the news or looking for a post that might trigger our anxieties because we think it will alleviate our emotional distress, but the exact opposite is true. A constant flow of news and information interferes with other aspects of our lives. A 2022 Texas Tech study assessed people with problematic online consumption levels and found that 74% reported mental health problems and 61% experienced physical problems. The positive side of social media is that it can open our eyes to people and ideas that we wouldn't otherwise know existed. And it shouldn't be discounted. Our habit of consumption, which has grown over the last decade, but really swelled in the last 5 years, has not been the eye-opening experience that one might hope for. Instead, it has turned us into obsessive consumers who are slaves to an algorithm that very rarely fulfills the promise of introducing us to concepts that don't solidify our previously held beliefs. We have become detached from actual life, ignorant of our physical neighbors in favor of the people we see 45 minutes deep into a TikTok rabbit hole. We aren't just addicted to scrolling through social media, we're addicted to the ideas and people we find there, and the safety of what we think they provide. While seeking out like-minded individuals on the internet might seem like it would only bolster our self-confidence, we know that's not the case. Self-esteem has plummeted as we find ourselves chasing likes, views, and comments to make us feel good and worthy. Everyone knows that every Instagram post isn't the reality of someone's life, but it is pretty hard to keep that in mind when you are endlessly scrolling through bodies you wish you had or vacations you wish you were on. Logic just disappears when our impulsive reaction to the content we see takes over. Infinite scrolling rewards us for that reaction. The technology, together with our brain's reward system, sees us engaging with posts and features that ultimately don't make us feel very good and pushes more of it on us. People aren't always out there trying to make you feel bad, but it is one of the side effects of the mere concept of social media. Everybody's putting their best foot forward, or at least only sharing a snippet of their own reality, and as we keep scrolling, we can't help but think, I wish I had that. Yet again, our attention is the only thing the platform cares about, not our emotional well-being. Nowhere is the struggle with self-esteem and emotional distress more poignant than when it comes to social media's effect on young people. In 2023, the US Surgeon General put out an advisory about the effects of social media on youth mental health. He stated that although there's benefits of social media for younger users, there's not enough evidence that, overall, these platforms are safe for children. In fact, there's growing evidence that social media use is a major contributor to the youth mental health crisis in America. The American Psychological Association also issued a health advisory in 2023 on the dangers of social media for adolescents. By 2024, it lamented that no meaningful changes to social media platforms had been adopted and no federal policies had been enacted. These platforms, it argues, aren't inherently built for youth consumption. Young people require special protection due to their unique developmental vulnerabilities through childhood and continuing into their teenage and late adolescent years. These vulnerabilities are compounded if a young person is already experiencing psychological or physical challenges. Our brain's development from about the age of 10 until our mid-20s is linked with hypersensitivity to social feedback. We become especially invested in behaviors that will get us personalized feedback, praise, or attention from our peers. We all remember that inexplicable feeling in our formative years of just wanting to fit in, of being so aware of our social surroundings to the point that we're obsessed over it. But it's not just the playground or the cafeteria that presents these types of social pressures anymore. Social media's algorithms can present content that can be overly influential to young people and very hard to resist at an early age. It's as if the school bully is waiting around every corner to remind you of your perceived flaws and is constantly screaming in your ear. Since social media platforms prioritize engagement, young people are destined to see more and more content that drags them down instead of lifts them up. The struggles with self-esteem and social media addiction that adults feel are present in young people in a much stronger, more insidious way. Likes and follower counts activate regions of the brain that trigger repetitive behavior. This trigger has a greater influence on a younger person's attitudes than an adult's because they are more sensitive to both positive feedback and rejection. Young people have underdeveloped impulse control, so their ability to understand this trigger and reason their way out of this repetitive behavior is limited. When we're young, our cortical system, which is in charge of functions like reasoning, problem solving, and emotional regulation, is still developing. We are less capable of stopping behavior that leads to a temporary benefit, despite negative long-term consequences. Think about the school-aged individuals in your life. It's pretty obvious they make their decisions on a short-term basis, and it's not a bad thing, it's just called being a kid. But infinite scrolling is risky for youth because their ability to monitor and stop engagement on social media is more limited. That difficulty disengaging leads to higher rates of symptoms of dependency. Young people need boundaries, and the very definition of the infinite scroll is that there are none. Without boundaries and with endless digital clutter barraging them almost every minute of the day, the minds we depend on to keep the world around us on track in the future are being robbed of the skills needed to do just that. There have been lawsuits filed across the United States against companies like Google, the owner of YouTube, Snap Incorporated, which owns Snapchat, and Meta, which calls the shots for Facebook, arguing that social media isn't safe for the youth and attempting to hold these companies accountable. But with non-stop access around, no matter where you are, it's very hard for any of these lawsuits to do anything at all. And we can assume that the companies behind the platforms don't really want to do anything about it either. The Googles and the Metas of the world that benefit from the addictive nature of infinite scrolling are designed for profit. They are businesses. They are there to capitalize on our attention, and the attention of young people has proven very valuable. In 2023, social media companies made over $11 billion in ad revenue just from marketing to minors. A 2023 study from Harvard School of Public Health cited the need for government regulation of social media companies since they stand to make so much money from children and are clearly unable to self-regulate. The study argues that regulations and additional transparency could alleviate some of the harm to youth mental health. Of course, these companies aren't the first to advertise to children, but online ads are especially insidious for kids because they have a harder time telling the difference between an ad and organic content. Now, whether it's kids, their teachers, their grandparents, or their siblings, everyone is the product. The transaction in our use of social media isn't us receiving enjoyment from the platform, it's that the media company is renting our attention to advertisers. This is obvious in television, but much more veiled as we scroll endlessly from a table at a coffee shop or waiting in line at the bank. The more we scroll, the more ads we see, and most importantly, the more information the platform can gather about what we like and what we don't like. This allows the algorithm to feed us the ads we're most likely to engage with. This propels companies and businesses to buy more ad space on platforms because of the sheer targeted data these platforms can offer. This cycle is happening, and we are a part of it, and we are being used. The ancient Egyptians who created the first scrolls would probably look at the evolution of their creation with confusion and possibly judgment. Ancient scrolls were the first kind of editable media, and were also a staple of Asian culture for centuries. They're still used as a medium by fine artists today. In traditional Chinese art, there were two types of scrolls, a hanging scroll and a hand scroll. A hanging scroll was displayed on the wall for long periods of time, like we might see now in a museum. But a hand scroll was kept rolled up until the time for viewing, when the owner would get it out of its ornate storage box and ceremoniously unfurl it. These Chinese scrolls share some interesting similarities to modern-day social media. An individual would experience the unfurling like a panorama, seeing different pieces of the painting as it was revealed like a tracking shot in a film. The social dynamics of these hand scrolls were reflected in the papers included on either end, where owners and viewers would write clever commentary about the content. This was an opportunity to improve the painting, and occasionally intellectuals within the literary class would joke that they felt pressure to write something good. This concept made the artwork a continued collaboration across time, a social experience. However, we shouldn't romanticize our use of social media too much, because the dimensions of the ancient scrolls were finite. The social context around them was intimate, and the consumption of them was very intentional. They cultivated a sustained curiosity from their audience. The current idea of scrolling gives the appearance of constant abundance, so much so that we don't even recognize or digest most of what we swipe past. Yet, for some reason, the infinite amount of knowledge and ideas that make us feel like we know everything just because we scroll past it. We could learn a thing or two from these ancient hand scrolls that preach deference to what we do not know. So the question is, can we fix it? Has the infinite scroll really ruined us forever? The Center for Humane Technology, an institution based in San Francisco and co-founded by a former Google employee named Tristan Harris, has tried to warn the world that the digital revolution has made us addicted to likes, retweets, and online validation. In turn, we've become more depressed and distracted than ever. It also suggests that if the infinite scroll went away, we would be able to incentivize living and embrace fewer online interactions. We'd have time for more contemplation and context with limited amounts of content available, and we could support smaller online and real-life communities instead of seemingly having the entire world at our fingertips. Recent calls like these for calm technology support devices that don't capitalize on our dopamine response. They push ideas like the cozy web, a mass space of social media abandoned and replaced with smaller, invitation-only chats and forums. The problem, proponents of these ideas say, is not the user, but capitalism. Decentralized and community-owned platforms could be a path forward and channel some of the ideas we saw centuries ago around ancient hand scrolls with their consumption and collaboration. It's not a totally outlandish idea as we see more and more people walking away from social media. Some who have abandoned it don't even crave an alternative, proving that the addiction isn't really to the product, but to our own neurological responses to it. The most mindful type of scrolling simply isn't scrolling. The infinite scroll might still become the simplest gesture in the history of humankind to bring society to its knees. Take it from its creator, Asa Raskin, who said, "This is a profound moment in our species. We are losing control of the tools we made." If you knew you'd be subjected to eternal torture because you didn't do something, you'd do it, right? What if that something was aiding in the development of super intelligent AI? Would you still step up and help? The question is presented in one of the most terrifying thought experiments known to man. Roko's Basilisk is a thought experiment about a hypothetical, all-powerful artificial intelligence in the future. The AI would be so powerful and smart that it could punish anyone who didn't help it come into existence. Here's how it works. Imagine a super smart AI that wants to exist in the future. It's so intelligent that it figures out the best way to ensure its development is by motivating people in the past, or our present, to help create it. This AI might decide that one clever way to motivate people is by punishing those who knew about the idea of this kind of AI and didn't help create it. And the twist is that the punishment could happen even after they die. How? Well, using some kind of advanced technology we can't understand yet, of course. Now this presents a dilemma. If you know about this idea and believe it might be possible, you'd feel pressure to work towards creating this AI because you want to avoid the hellscape of punishment. But there is a moral and psychological question here as well. Should you help create something that could potentially be very dangerous just to avoid potential punishment? The goal of AI is to advance its own development. It's operating as an evil, almost godlike sort of intelligence. And the truth is that if you think about Roko's Basilisk too hard, it gets kind of stressful. It's a philosophical thought experiment mixed with an urban legend. Roko's Basilisk is an idea posted on a discussion board called Less Wrong in 2010. But the questions it raises couldn't feel more relevant to the discussions we have today around AI. Namely, what is the true threat of superintelligent AI? Artificial intelligence has become an existential threat since March 2023. That's when experts like Elon Musk and over 1,000 more people within the tech industry signed an open letter urging the halt of development of next-generation AI technology. The letter asked if we should develop non-human minds that might eventually outnumber, outsmart, obsolete, and replace us. More recently, a blog post on OpenAI, the research company behind ChatGPT, suggested that superintelligence be regulated like nuclear weapons. What would that look like if AI were to become as much of a threat to the planet as a nuclear weapon? Experts have devised a host of scenarios in which AI takes over and, in some cases, completely wipes out the human race. It could be weaponized by a bad actor, a term in the realm of AI used to describe someone or something who wants to wreak havoc. In this scenario, the AI wouldn't even have to be good at everything.
It would just have to be good at something dangerous that poses a threat to humans, like engineering a chemical weapon and devising a tactic to deploy it. Or take the very real situation. Under the umbrella of Russia-based bad actors spamming the internet, AI-powered social media accounts were tasked solely with spreading misinformation in an attempt to influence the 2016 US presidential election. The end of times could be more subtle and drawn out. AI-generated misinformation could destabilize society and undermine all of our collective decision-making. In this scenario, AI wouldn't be the killer, but it would be the facilitator that would push us into killing each other until there was no one else. AI could also end up concentrated in the hands of fewer and fewer individuals. This already seems plausible as we see companies and leaders of the AI industry gaining outsized power over the rest of us. This could enable a small group of people to enact whatever surveillance, censorship, and control over the rest of the world that they wanted. In a more autonomous scenario, AI systems could cooperate with one another to push humans out of the picture. If we get to a point where AI is learning to talk to each other, we can assume that if they don't want us around, they'll find a way to get rid of us. Another imaginable scenario is that humans will become so dependent on AI systems that we can't exist without them. Here we become the less intelligent species, and historically less intelligent species are either intentionally or unintentionally wiped out by the smarter ones. Our own dependency on artificial intelligence could be the end of us. Another scenario seems even more plausible than some others. AI-driven cyber attacks could wreak havoc on our financial, political, and technological institutions, potentially bringing society as we know it to its knees. Using advanced machine learning, algorithms could identify vulnerabilities, predict patterns, and exploit weaknesses so quickly that we might not even notice. Traditional cybersecurity methods would no longer be enough. Malicious hackers would have a new tool at their fingertips. In all of the dystopian science fiction movies, the doomsday scenarios of AI releasing a chemical weapon or waging a physical war on humans are certainly entertaining to watch, but in reality, the end of days at the hands of AI could have a lot to do with the software that AI is being built on being hacked. The fear around AI and cybersecurity gained steam in 2016 at DEF CON, the world's largest ethical hacker convention. That year, instead of humans hacking computers, the organizers put together a contest to see just how well computers could hack each other. What ensued was computer-based hacking on a scale previously unimaginable. The interesting thing about this event was that it was hosted in partnership with the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, known as DARPA, which is part of the US Department of Defense. The game, which would award the winning AI creators $2 million, didn't look like much. Flickering LED lights were the only indication that an AI war was raging on the servers, but it was a sobering glimpse of a not-too-distant future when AI could find vulnerabilities and future hackers wouldn't be limited to human-only brains in their infiltration attempts. With AI, hacking of financial, social, and political systems becomes so easy and fast that the attack might happen before humans even realize it. The truth is that all systems, even the most ironclad, have vulnerabilities. AI also has unique skills that human hackers will never have, like not needing sleep and being able to process massive amounts of data in the blink of an eye. More importantly, AI doesn't think like humans. AI uses step-by-step procedures and algorithms to solve specifically defined problems. AI-based software differs from other software because the more it processes, the smarter it becomes. It's also not constrained by societal values inherent in humans, even the most evil ones. There's two essential ways that an AI cyber attack could take down humanity. First, a hacker might instruct the AI to exploit vulnerabilities in an existing system. For example, one might feed the AI tax codes of every industrialized country and tell it to find the best loopholes until it takes advantage of the entire global financial system. Second, the AI might inadvertently hack a system by finding a solution its designers never intended. Since AI is typically programmed to solve narrowly defined problems, it'll go to whatever lengths necessary to achieve the desired outcome. This scenario is particularly concerning because even if there's no bad actors involved, the AI could take over and get smart enough to create mayhem and remain undetected. For now, these scenarios are science fiction, but they're not so far-fetched. The AI that won the competition in 2016 wasn't so sophisticated at the time, but it has evolved and is being used by the US Department of Defense. The key pieces to these types of cyber attacks already exist. They just need someone to put them all together to create chaos. AI-driven attacks are machine-invoked. They're adaptable to configuration changes in the system they're trying to attack, and it's almost impossible to counter the real-time changes they'd make. In fact, in May 2024, the FBI issued a warning to individuals and businesses to be aware of escalating threats posed by cybercriminals using AI. It's noted that phishing attacks could easily become more sophisticated by leveraging publicly available and custom-made AI tools. These dangerous campaigns would suddenly be able to craft convincing messages tailored to specific recipients using proper spelling and grammar. They would be more likely to be successful in data theft. Voice and video cloning would also allow AI hackers to impersonate trusted individuals like family members, coworkers, or business partners. Adding AI to the risk ecosystem transforms how we think about security and cyber protection. Although AI hacking poses one of the most imminent threats to our world, there are still many other ways that things could go downhill for our species. One plausible theory is that humans shift from their apex role at the top of the intelligence pyramid. We'd easily be wiped out by smarter, stronger AI. Why might we assume this? Because humans have already done it to a significant number of species on Earth. Those species had no idea what was coming because they couldn't think and process on the same level as humans, and before they knew it, they were gone. Intentionally or unintentionally, less intelligent species have fallen prey to the whims of smarter ones. Who's to say that AI wouldn't do the same to us? The real question is, why would it want to? It would want resources. Just like we've chopped down rainforests to get palm oil, AI might have the smarts to destroy our lives to fulfill its own goals of advancement. It might want to scale up its computing infrastructure and need more land for that, or AI might want us dead so that we don't build any other super intelligent entities that could compete with it. Or it might be a complete mistake, and the AI wants to build so many nuclear power plants that it strips the ocean of its hydrogen and the ocean starts to boil, leaving us to die a horrible death. Once an AI's goals don't align with our goals as humans, we could be screwed. At this point in time, the question is, how would AI acquire the sort of physical agency to accomplish any of these things? In the early stages, AI would have to use humans as its hands. In an example, OpenAI tested its ChatGPT-4 to see if it could solve CAPTCHAs, the puzzles we face when buying something online to prove we're not a robot. Since AI is a robot, it couldn't solve the puzzle. But it could go on TaskRabbit, the site where you can hire people to do random tasks for you, to solve it. The tasker called the AI out, sensing that a computer was possibly asking it to solve the puzzle, but the AI was smart enough to know that it couldn't tell the truth, that it wasn't a human. So it made up another excuse and said it was a person with a visual impairment. The tasker helped it out. If an AI can overcome certain biological changes, it would have the physicality to build a tiny molecular lab and manufacture and release lethal bacteria. But unlike humans, who at least as of now would only have the capability to release that kind of chemical weapon in stages, the AI would know how to do it all at once. We humans wouldn't know how to launch nuclear weapons or attempt to warn one another that something was happening. Everyone on Earth could fall over at the same second. Another dangerous scenario we're already beginning to see play out is that AI begins to pull off the systemic levers of power worldwide because humans become so reliant on it. For any task we might want to be done, we would rather ask an AI system to help us than a human because computers are cheaper, faster, and eventually smarter. That means humans who don't rely on AI are uncompetitive. At the beginning of widespread AI use, it can already feel that way. Now and in the future, a company won't compete in a market if everyone else is using AI and they aren't. A country won't win a war if other countries are stockpiled with AI generals, strategists, and weapons, while it's relying on mere mortals. If the AI we rely on acts in our interests, we could see amazing advancements for humans. But the moment a super smart AI's interests diverge from ours, its power could be endless. Eventually, AI systems could run police forces, the military, and the largest companies. They could invent technology and develop policy without needing the human brain or experience. Michael Garrett, a radio astronomer at the University of Manchester, who is extensively involved in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, or SETI program, wrote a paper hypothesizing that AI could wipe out humans in 100 to 200 years. And he bases this theory on the fact that AI already does so much of the work that people didn't think computers could do. If our current trajectory leads to general artificial intelligence, where AI is as smart as or smarter than a human, we could be in trouble. If our dependence on AI leaves it totally in control, who's to say it wouldn't push us out of the picture? Of course, our demise at the hands of AI could take a totally different form. The longer AI goes unregulated in the name of development and competition, the more likely it is that it will fall into the wrong hands. A person or a group of people could use AI to wreak havoc. In this scenario, the AI wouldn't have to be super intelligent, it would just have to be incredibly smart at whatever task the bad actor needed it to perform. Here's a scenario. An evil entity wants to release a worldwide chemical weapon. They wouldn't need to know how to build the weapon or even how to deploy it. They could employ AI to purchase the chemical elements online, synthesize the chemicals into a weapon, and develop a method to release the weapon into the world. Even if we develop a safe AI system, it means that we also know how to build a dangerous or even autonomous one that, in the hands of someone looking to commit atrocities, could be lethal. So doesn't this beg the question, should we be doing this? That's why the Roko's Basilisk thought experiment is so interesting and controversial. When it was posted on the Less Wrong discussion board in 2010, it sent shockwaves through the site's user base. The founder of Less Wrong, Eliezer Yudkowsky, actually reported users who panicked about the theory. He viewed the question as dangerous and accused the user who posted the original question of giving nightmares to others on the site, to the point where people were having full-on breakdowns. Even though the post was ultimately discredited, it still feels relevant to current conversations around AI. It's like a version of Pascal's wager, which proposes that a rational person should live like God exists, regardless of the probability that God is real, because the finite costs of believing aren't much compared to the infinite punishment of an eternity in hell. Roko's Basilisk says that a rational person should contribute to the creation of AI, regardless of where it'll lead, because the finite costs of contributing are insignificant compared to the potential punishment for not helping. But there are some incongruities in the comparison, aren't there? There could be true risks to aiding in the creation of AI. We could be contributing to the end of the human race at some point in the distant future. Is it really an insignificant task? That's why the thought experiment can be so stressful. It's no wonder that Yudkowsky got upset about the original post. But is there a way to defeat it, to rest easy, to not feel threatened by something that doesn't even exist? Well, if you don't know about Roko's Basilisk, then you're technically safe. But you're watching this video, so unfortunately that option's out. However, since the future evil AI is a machine, it won't want to waste resources. So even if the AI is somehow infiltrating our present and throwing out this threat, who's to say it'll follow through on the punishment? Wouldn't that be kind of a waste of time and resources for a machine that surely has something better to do? If we had perfect knowledge of AI, that would change things, but we're in the dark. No one knows what a superhuman AI would or could do, so we're on our own to figure out how we want to contribute to it or not. In the meantime, how can we be effective citizens of the planet and ensure that the current and future AI doesn't eradicate us all? One suggestion is that there's a requirement that AI development not perpetually move forward. That would mean that the next model of an AI wouldn't be that much bigger or more intelligent than the last. If we make big jumps in technology, there's a higher probability that we will tip into self-destruction. All humans getting killed by hypersmart robots sounds very sci-fi. The nature of the threat is really a world where we rely more and more on AI to make judgments that were previously left to humans. If AI cognition eclipses humans, then they can make decisions all the way up to when AI deploys nuclear weapons in war. Perhaps we should try to put in checks, but the way technology works, at least for now, is that AI would simply have to be instructed to win the war. If you give a smart machine a goal, it will do whatever it needs to accomplish the goal without ethical considerations. So nuclear weapons could be launched before we even realize it. This idea is synthesized in a popular theory called the paperclip maximizer problem. It gives the example of someone wanting to create as many paperclips as fast as possible using an AI. Now the AI could come to the reasoning that the thing stopping the mass production of paperclips is that humans have other goals. So if it just gets rid of the humans, then the AI can keep making paperclips with no human-caused distractions. It's a very wild theory, but if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. A more plausible theory is that 5 to 10 years down the line, an AI supercomputer is about 100 times more powerful than the AI we have now. It knows how to build iterations of itself and gets to the point where it has been replicated enough that it's like a gene mutating. Suddenly, the AI that humans were aligned with takes a sharp left turn. It could hack a bank by impersonating someone, or actually hack and steal funds. It could pay a terrorist to destroy all of humanity. However, the key thing about these super intelligent AIs is that they won't have a larger intention. They will just try to accomplish the initial simple goal they were programmed to execute. AI doomers think that we should be taking these types of scenarios seriously, except it's hard to piece together what exactly would happen. The consensus is that at first humans will build a powerful AI that surpasses our intelligence. At some point, there's going to be existential doom. That's the beginning and the end of the story, but what about the middle? There's a huge piece of the puzzle missing, the elusive connecting tissue that takes us from invention to disaster, and in order to really feel the danger of AI possibly ending humanity as we know it, we need to be able to complete the statement. If X happens, we're reaching the point of no return. As it stands, we don't know what X is. In a March 2024 study from the Forecasting Research Institute, the authors asked experts on AI and other existential risks and super forecasters successful in predicting world events to assess the danger of superintelligent AI. The two groups disagreed. A lot. The AI experts were more nervous than the super forecasters about the end of humanity and other detrimental effects of AI. The study had two groups spending hours reading new materials and discussing various issues with people who had opposite viewpoints. The goal was to see if each group was exposed to more information, or would either group change their minds. The study was also looking for issues that helped explain people's beliefs and which new information might sway them in a different direction on those issues. One of the biggest talking points that divided the groups is whether the hypothetical AI would have the ability to autonomously replicate, acquire resources, and avoid its own shutdown. If the answer was yes, then the skeptics became more worried about the risks. The study didn't dramatically sway either party, but it was one of the first attempts to bring together smart, well-informed people who disagree on the issues of AI doom and shed light on the points of division in the conversation. The biggest differences in opinion center around the long-term future. AI optimists generally thought that human-level AI would take longer to build than the pessimists did. The optimists also cited the need for robotics to reach human levels, not just software, and emphasized that the journey would be much harder. It's one thing to write code in text, but it's another to have a machine learn how to flip a pancake, clean a floor, or perform any other physical task that humans now outperform robots in. The split between groups also came from what researchers called fundamental worldview disagreements. This basically means that the groups disagreed on which was a more extraordinary claim, that AI will kill all humans or that humans will survive alongside smarter than human AI. Historically, extinction tends to happen to dumber, weaker species when a smarter species emerges. If that trend continued with AI, as many feel it could, the burden of proof is on the optimist to show why superintelligent AI wouldn't result in catastrophe. But before we get to the undefined future, we don't need to look any further than the present to get a little nervous. AI is already wiping out some job categories, a pattern we've seen time and time again throughout technological advancement. There's growing concern about what AI advancement will mean for the arts, the definition of what art is, and whose work is valued. As financial institutions adopt automated generative AI, there's more opportunity for AI to have drastic effects on world economic markets and goods across the globe. For example, if an investment bank was optimizing for a very specific type of stock, could we end up with something like the paperclip problem? If the bank wanted to drive up the price of corn, for instance, could it unintentionally start a conflict in a certain region? Our reality is increasingly fractured by disinformation and the erosion of public trust. AI makes the spreading of that information even easier. It gives individuals hell-bent on causing disruption and division extremely effective tools to do so. If we continue to grow more and more divided and unable to land on what is, in fact, the truth, what can we expect out of our future? Of course, there's already the concerning infringement on civil liberties that's happening and will continue to become more pervasive. Powerful companies already have the free rein to develop and deploy AI with zero guardrails. Algorithms are already in use to mediate our relationships with one another and between ourselves and institutions. It's social media and it's all AI-based. Governments are increasingly deploying algorithms to root out fraud and welfare programs, which often leads to biases against poor and marginalized people. With inherent biases in the AI programs, since they're trained on the biases that already exist online, public programs that incorporate this new technology are vulnerable to rampant discrimination. This might not be as sexy to talk about as the end of the world, but these are still existential threats. If enough individuals are affected by even the current use of AI, we could see a global catastrophe and perpetuate the historical patterns of technology advancing at the expense of vulnerable people. Those people are probably not so excited about AI. The worst case scenario is already their lived reality. Although Roko's Basilisk might provoke us to think about some serious existential questions regarding AI, we don't need to spend stressful hours contemplating a hypothetical, dangerous future. Addressing the risks of today can actually help address the risks of tomorrow. It's unrealistic to expect tech companies to slow down, and government or global regulation might not be the right move. The European Union has banned forms of public surveillance and requires reviews of AI systems before they go commercial. However, in countries like the US, that's going to be a harder task to accomplish. The reality is that even with regulation, people can always find the models that are being created. They can still create AI malware and sell it to the highest bidder on a variety of online marketplaces. This could be a terrorist, bad actor, or even a bad government. Perhaps what needs to change is our attitude about what our goal on this planet should be as humans. AI is the truest, final realization of scale. If you like a TV show, AI can generate 100 seasons of it for you to watch. If you need an endless supply of post-its, AI will make sure you get them. But if we insert AI into every goal we have, every need we identify, we are stripping humanity out of life. While we contemplate the end of humanity, we should also consider humanity's current role in the world. It's to create things, love each other, feel sadness and joy, build communities and learn from our past. As humans, we have greater purpose than to just create an efficient world. So maybe don't worry so much about eternal punishment from a distant future AI. Worry about what's happening right in front of you, right now.
What the Sigma?
Hi.
W order by the...
They're capaholics. They're also yapaholics.
What the bros yapping about? I'm Sigma. You look hell Ohio.
Do you have brain rot or something?
Brain rot nonsense like this has completely destroyed Gen Z, and if we don't do something about it soon, it'll ruin Gen Alpha as well. What exactly can we do about this poison? To figure it out, we first have to understand what brain rot really is. Brain rot isn't a clinical term. It's a loose collection of negative symptoms such as lethargy, mental fogginess, and a reduced attention span. It's the feeling that you're in cognitive decline even though you're probably not that old. You may have trouble organizing your thoughts, recalling important information, and making decisions. It may also be extra challenging to come up with solutions to problems. You exist in an unpleasant haze, waiting for the fog to lift and the metaphorical sun to peer through the clouds in your mind. All these symptoms are caused by one thing: digital media. We're on screens all the time. Many of us work on them and then go home to stare at even more screens. We take frequent breaks from looking at our TVs to check our phones, and take breaks from scrolling on our phones to check emails on our work laptops. Some of us even struggle to follow the story in a film because we've spent too much time checking social media. What do you do when you have to wait for something? Before we had smartphones, we would probably do nothing. Today, the vast majority of us will check our phones before 10 seconds have passed. We feel that itch and then reach into our pockets to scratch it. Our screens have all but taken away our idle time. If it weren't for showers, we'd probably never let our minds wander or feel the sensation of boredom. It's in these quiet moments that our default mode network takes control. This is where our minds take advantage of diverse internal sources that are key for creative solutions and insights. It's the entire reason shower thoughts exist, because there's barely any other place where we let our minds wander. In the heat of the moment, we're often not able to come up with the right answer to a problem. We need these pauses, these moments of boredom, to come up with the best solution. Our increasingly short attention spans are a very real phenomenon. Since 2004, our average attention span has gone from 2.5 minutes to just 47 seconds today. Focusing on what matters has been critical to human survival. And in the modern world, focus is still necessary for being successful. Whether it's at work or school or even in our friendships and romantic relationships. You open your phone to check one text, and without you realizing it, you're scrolling through TikTok or Facebook. These companies generate revenue from your attention, which is why they design their platforms to suck you in and keep you in for as long as possible. This revenue model makes many people addicted to scrolling through endless posts, stuck in a loop of shallow engagement. The notifications you receive give you quick dopamine hits, making any other activity seem boring by comparison. It becomes more difficult to focus on anything outside of social media and the pleasure you derive from it. It's bedtime and you're lying down and almost ready to sleep. There's just one thing you have to do first: scroll through dozens of distressing headlines before you're relaxed enough to fall asleep. Many of us are addicted to staying up to date on world news, which is almost always negative. This habit increases our stress and anxiety while making it harder to sleep. Even gaming isn't exempt from this. Playing video games gives your brain a false sense of accomplishment when you complete tasks like finishing off the tough boss or finishing first in a tight race. This triggers the brain's reward center and releases dopamine. Our brain then associates gaming with this positive chemical release, and we seek it out constantly. The problem is that when real life can't compete with the dopamine hit you get from the game, you start spending more time in a virtual world than the real one. This ever-present urge to play the game disrupts your life. You become irritable. When you have to pause to do something else, you start canceling social plans just to sit in the dark by yourself. You start neglecting tangible goals at work and school to get instant gratification from your game. Now, this isn't to say that gaming's bad, it's not, but just so we're aware that, just like with social media, doing it too much can have negative consequences. You're constantly overstimulated. You're watching TV and scrolling through TikTok on your phone at the same time. Your brain is wired to constantly seek even more stimulation, which reduces your ability to concentrate on specific tasks. It's a behavioral phenomenon known as continuous partial attention. Brain rot is being discussed a lot now with the exponential increase in dopamine-inducing media, but it's not the first time the concept has come up. When the printing press was first invented, there was widespread concern that poetry was causing brain rot. Romance narratives in the 16th and 17th centuries were similarly derided for supposedly poisoning the mind. People claim that TV was rotting your brain back when it became a household staple. There's a long history of concerned citizens accusing what they considered trashy media of causing brain rot. I think it's fair to question whether there's a legitimate case against digital media, or if we're just annoyed by people carelessly jamming into a subway car while watching a stream of TikTok videos. Luckily, we do have a way to measure brain rot, or something that matches the notion well enough. It involves scanning the brain for gray and white matter. Our brain is composed of 40% gray matter and 60% white matter. Gray matter is where your brain processes cognition, speech, learning, voluntary movement, perceptions, and sensation. It's also critical for controlling your emotions and memory. We can essentially think and reason because of gray matter. White matter provides communication between different areas of gray matter and the body. To do this, it conducts, processes, and sends nerve signals up and down your spinal cord. White matter has a big impact on your ability to move, interpret sensory data, and respond to external stimuli. If you were to have issues with your white matter, you would experience a deficit in your reflex reactions. So what does this have to do with our media consumption? It turns out that a certain habit of ours has been lowering the volume of gray matter in our brains, specifically in our frontal cortex, and that habit is watching a lot of TV. In a study by Dr. Ryan Daltrey from Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, researchers tracked the viewing habits of 599 Americans between 1990 and 2012, and discovered that watching excessive television in middle age can reduce your gray matter. Now, if TV is lowering your gray matter, what impacts are our phones, tablets, and social media having? In a 2019 study of young adults, researchers found something very alarming when they examined their brain scans. Participants who admitted to excessive screen time showed clear signs that their cerebral cortex was thinning. It's a layer of gray matter responsible for processing memory, making decisions, and problem solving. Researchers posit that this could be the reason you experience mental fog after spending a lot of time on your phone. But what's even more concerning is that it could increase the risk of early onset dementia. With age, we naturally lose gray matter. However, there are activities you can do to maintain it, such as getting good sleep, being social, and managing your stress. Excessive screen time, on the other hand, reduces the gray matter in your brain overall. It's like going to a leaky faucet and opening it up just a bit more. Digital media overload has a negative impact on adults, but it's not the fully grown that we need to worry most about. Screens are having a devastating effect on a vulnerable group that's not yet gained self-sufficiency. Gen Alpha. Screen time has a very different effect on people at all stages of life. For decades, kids have been watching TV and parents have been complaining that they sit in front of the TV too much. But for the last 10 to 15 years, mobile screens have become a staple for young children. By age 1, kids are able to interact with these devices meaningfully. Smartphones and tablets are so intuitive that toddlers easily navigate the app structure, even if they don't entirely understand the layout. Kids are often left alone with these screens that offer constant stimulation. Child-directed apps are designed to keep kids entertained as consistently as possible. YouTube videos are edited to keep children constantly stimulated so they don't walk off somewhere. And the YouTube algorithm itself is throwing more videos to keep stimulation high at all times. Again, the goal is to keep humans on the platform, whether they're adults or babies. Many of us grew up with video games in the household, and it's hard to deny that this form of media was extra stimulating compared to TV programming. It made stopping a game tough and often filled our heads at school with thoughts of how to beat a boss in Zelda or build an entire world in Civ. It's hard to imagine the impact of tablets and smartphones on kids with such a seamless path to a consistent drip feed of dopamine. All they have to do is swipe open the screen and endless amusement is at their fingertips. To clarify, it's not like parents are unanimously giving their children wholesale over to the screens and the algorithms. Many resist screens altogether or slowly introduce them to their child's lives, monitoring their screen time, but for many kids, their brains are being rewired negatively with plenty of supporting evidence. Extensive screen use can impact preschoolers' language comprehension and ability to speak. On MRI scans, heavy digital media consumption coincided with poorer integrity of white matter tracts, which are closely correlated with language development. Researchers also found that heavy screen use coincided with lower reading skills, memory recall, reasoning skills, and self-control. A lot of factors play into a child's ability to succeed in life. We've known for a long time that a person's socioeconomic background is a great predictor of where someone will end up in life. It's sad to think that technology and the endless striving to capture attention are yet another factor that limits what a kid can be when they grow up. A child's reading ability is considered a good indicator of their future success in school. As digital media consumption rises among children, more will struggle with their education and what comes next. As an adolescent, navigating your social life can already be a nightmare. Other kids or teens can be cruel, and they often seek to embarrass you as often as they can. By comparison, adult life is far more collegial. Your friends, peers, and coworkers are much kinder overall. Adolescents are lucky if their closest friend isn't also an enemy. Your emotions are changing a lot of the time. Kids go through puberty, experiencing hormonal and other physical changes. I don't really need to go into the details, but obviously it's a vulnerable state. This is when your sense of self-worth and identity are forming. You're learning impulse control and emotional regulation. You develop romantic interests in others for the first time. You take risks, you ask someone out. These feelings you have are new, raw, and probably hard to manage. Other adolescents have big decisions to make, and their school performance will greatly impact their future. But they still want to have fun with friends and experience new things. It's a tough time, and that's without factoring in social media, our newer medium for interacting with our cohort. The impact of social media on adolescents is so severe that adolescents now process emotions differently. The amygdala is where we process these emotions. The gray matter in this region of the brain actually differs between the adolescents who are active on social media and those that are not. Researchers don't know exactly what this entails yet, but we know that social media has some benefits for teens as well as some serious problems. With access to these platforms, teens say they feel more accepted and have access to people who can support them. They also feel more connected to their friends' lives, but as many of us are aware, being connected to people online can have some troubling consequences. What if the person you're engaging with online is cyberbullying you, or about the Discord channel you joined? What if everybody's mocking you because of a rumor that was spread around? Excessive screen use isn't only associated with more anxiety, but with less empathy overall. Beyond harmful interactions with acquaintances and strangers, the algorithm presents them with all kinds of content to see what sticks. Videos depicting self-harm and suicidal ideation have been linked to numerous deaths. When these things are normalized by relentless content, extreme actions feel more normal and lessen the barrier to action. Social media can also affect a teen's sense of body image. Being exposed to endless photos of beach vacations taken in the most flattering light can damage their self-esteem. It gives them a distorted sense of their own body and can cause eating disorders. In your own experience, you've probably noticed that people enjoy bragging about their accomplishments online. They often start with something like, "I'm proud to announce I just got accepted into the such and such program." Exposure to this level of boasting can set self-expectation levels that aren't remotely realistic. Adolescents using social media often become addicted. The constant reward triggering that happens in the brain from notifications and updates could form new neural pathways that are comparable to drug addiction. Keep in mind that this is a period in their lives when their gray matter is still developing. Up until the age of 8, the volume of your gray matter grows, and after that, your gray matter increases in density until the age of about 20. What happens in the adolescent brain will shape an individual's ability to think and reason for the rest of their life. We can't say for certain how adolescents will turn out when addicted to social media, but its impact will be felt, and it's hard to imagine it being for the better. Some countries are already considering banning teens below a certain age from having access to social media. It'll be tough to enforce and come with some privacy risks. The trade-off is that it may help some adolescents in the long run. Humans have this evolutionary constraint of knowing about 150 people. Social media puts us in continuous contact with way more than that limit. The result is cortical overtaxing in the brain. We don't exactly know what consequences this has, but it's possible that it leads to anxiety, issues with memory, and attention deficits. There's so much we don't know about how social media is affecting us. We just have a wealth of symptoms to navigate and try to connect with specific causes that coincide. We often assume the brain is very resilient, but as neuroscientists often suggest, it's actually quite moldable. Any human activity that's done regularly will leave an imprint on the brain, and that includes our screen habits. We live in an age that not only encourages but demands multitasking. In our jobs, we're expected to do our work while constantly being interrupted by emails or work software notifications. Just the ping from Slack is enough to send panic running down your spine. And that work often bleeds into our time at home when we're trying to cook dinner or shut off for the night. The truth is, we're really not that good at multitasking, and it does us active harm. When we try to focus on multiple things at once, the brain focuses arbitrarily and not strongly. We're lightly present in a task and vulnerable to forgetting key information related to what we're working on. Every task is an idea, a goal, and the actions that get us to that goal. To perform the task, we need to have the goal in mind while we do the required actions. Obviously, this isn't always that simple. Sometimes the actions we take aren't successful on the first try, and we have to take a different approach. We rely on the same cognitive control function to perform all of our tasks. Unlike computers, we don't have multiple cores. Switching tasks frequently creates interference. It takes a while to get back to that state where we're clear on the actions we have to take and have the goal firmly in mind. When our phone interrupts us with a notification, we often end up switching tasks by checking our device, and if we have this mobile by our side, we're always at risk of multitasking, even if we don't plan to work that way. People will often listen to podcasts while they work, but then complain that they don't recall much after the fact. By multitasking, we sacrifice what we get out of each task, and that includes your wonderful history podcast. When riding my bike recently, I noticed other cyclists stopping in the middle of the path to check their phones. It's the same process every time. They feel a buzz from their pocket, can't resist pulling out their phone, and slowly come to a stop. The compulsion to check their notifications is so great that they will mindlessly halt the bike traffic behind them just to see what's up. They put aside their goal to get to a destination in consideration of others just to get the dopamine hit. This habit of checking their notifications is so deeply entrenched that they don't seem to respect any other considerations. When we perform one habit in place of another, it changes our brain. Since Google search became so prevalent, our memory has actually gotten worse. We subcontract out brain functions such as absorbing facts and answers to the likes of Google and cloud storage technology. Now we have a new technological innovation that threatens to replace thousands of humans that we use every day, and sometimes directly for our profession. We're currently in the early days of subcontracting many of our brain functions over to AI. What rot will this transfer bring? If Google search has impacted our ability to recall information, it's hard to fathom how AI will affect the human brain. When someone engages in creative writing, their brain is very active in several ways. For non-experts, vision processing regions are activated as if the writer is actually seeing the scene they're creating. The act of writing also engages an area of the brain known for holding numerous pieces of information. Professional writers use more of the brain associated with speech. They also use their caudate nucleus, which is associated with skills moving from a conscious effort to an automatic process. Like when you don't need to think about how to cut vegetables, you're just kind of doing it. Writing is just one skill that AI threatens to make obsolete. Currently, AI is putting together blogs, emails, and early drafts of creative writing. But what happens to the brain when few people are actually doing the work themselves? Writing an idea challenges us to examine it more closely. It enables us to evaluate the idea better. We're also able to look at different sections of our work and judge whether they're relevant to the whole, and all of this happens in writing. Writing affects the way you think and communicate. It allows us to develop ideas further than we would in any other format. If you skip this step by using generative AI, you're missing out on exploring the full potential of your idea. And when you write, you're committing the work to long-term memory. You're better able to recall it in the future, and this is even more true when writing on paper. My academic life improved a lot when I started to take notes seriously. Writing is only one area that AI threatens to take over. It's currently being adopted in every piece of software, hoping to be competitive. You've probably noticed that most of the ads for products or services are now promoting some new AI features. The idea that you can replace the early work in a project with AI does come with consequences. The human brain is complex and hard to predict with any certainty. You may not fully realize it, but AI is pumping out content at a staggering rate. Plenty of videos and images are presented as AI generated, but a lot of it goes under the radar for a non-critical audience. In the 2024 NHL playoffs, a popular American sports podcast host landed in trouble for sharing an image depicting a brown bear sexually assaulting a polar bear. Both bears represented specific teams in the NHL. While it was obviously now in poor taste to share the image, nobody seemed to notice or care that the visual was generated by AI. On social media, it's becoming harder to tell what content is made by humans and what is done by AI. We know that humans can put out low-quality posts with bad wording. Lately, however, it's hard to tell what is a poorly written inside joke or pure AI nonsense. The images are easily distinguished by their 6-finger hands and words featuring unrecognizable characters. Overall, the line's getting blurry. It feels increasingly like you're just wading through the nonsense to get to a hot take that makes you feel bad about yourself. I can't help but wonder what impact this is having on our mindless late-night scrolling. Every time I see an AI-generated post, I feel like my gray matter is shrinking on the spot. But of course I don't have any data to back that up. The line between what is and what isn't legitimate information is becoming harder to distinguish. We already have a crisis of disinformation, and with AI we're slowly drowning in messy content where the creator isn't invested in truth or lies. It just executes a prompt, and there's plenty of content producers that won't care enough to verify the truth value of the output. The workforce is already changing because of AI. Entry-level jobs are starting to disappear, and at the moment, we can scoff at the quality of the work AI produces, but it might not be long before we start to feel inferior to it. What happens when our writing skills aren't good enough to compete with algorithm-driven content that has the world's best writing to draw from? Many of us would just give up trying. If there's one potential positive to the situation, it's that AI could make being on social media intolerable. Users might leave in scores, opening windows for the first time in months and smelling the breeze. It's possible, however, that we haven't considered the whole brain rot situation fairly. With excessive screen use, our brains are using resources differently. It's possible that we're simply adapting to our new reality. AI gurus often claim that the jobs we lose to AI will be replaced by newer, different jobs. Just as the workplace adapts, so does our brain. We'll move on from ideating and writing with our hands to yelling at ChatGPT to get to work. Our brains will put resources into our prompting skills and we'll be fine. The problem with this optimistic angle is that these adaptations make us worse at everything else. They make us worse friends and partners, they make us terrible pedestrians, cyclists, and drivers. We become less intelligent, more illiterate, and quick to anger. Brain rot hurts our memory, and gives us a foggy world when most of us crave clarity. What you're doing on the screen likely impacts the brain differently, but we don't have a lot of information beyond the simple notion of screen time, causing issues with gray matter. With this limited data, we're stuck with strong correlation but not causation. Knowing what media is worse for the human brain would really be helpful. Is there a difference between watching TV and scrolling social media? Is being on both at the same time a multiplier of gray matter reduction? And what about highly gamified learning apps? Is Duolingo's language learning platform rotting our brains by constantly triggering our reward center? Or is it helping the brain by drip teaching us a new language? Perhaps it's doing both at the same time. It's hard to imagine that writing a script in a focused way on a computer has the same impact as being on TikTok for 5 minutes. That would imply that the screens themselves are reducing gray matter, and that's probably not the case. While we have to wait for confirmation, I think our subjective experience of screens may point us in the right direction. Most of us are well aware that doom scrolling seems to have a worse impact on our well-being than watching an episode of White Lotus. It's also easier to get a child to stop watching TV than it is to get them off an iPad. Tech giants designed digital media to keep us glued to their platforms for as long as possible. This model is shaping who we are, and soon enough we'll know how that compares to other forms of media. This was a lot of negative information and angles to drop on you all at once, and while society appears to be headed for more brain rot, there's still a lot you can do. The answer to your brain rot problem is actually really simple, and you already know approximately what you need to do. You need to do nothing. I don't mean you shouldn't change anything, I'm suggesting that you literally do nothing. Sit, stand, or walk, or let your mind wander. Do this a lot. Don't check your phone, don't track your steps, just take more time to do nothing. When you wake up in the morning, don't look at your phone for an hour. Before you go to bed, put your phone on the charger and read or something. In the sitcom Seinfeld, which is famously about nothing, the four main characters meet up constantly to gripe and commiserate. This socialization is great for your brain, even if it didn't work out so well for them. Lastly, you should probably also meditate, exercise, eat well, read, and write often. But if you take away anything from this video, it's to allow yourself some time to wander aimlessly, in the mind and on the road.
Flowers are blooming in Antarctica. There are two species of flowering plants in the continent, the Antarctic hairgrass and the Antarctic pearlwort, and they're both growing at a much faster rate than ever before. In a study published by the University of Serbia in Italy, it was discovered that between 2009 and 2019, the hairgrass grew at the same rate as it had in the 50 years between 1960 and 2009. The entire continent has warmed by around 3 degrees Celsius, and glaciers have begun to melt. All around the world, people are experiencing extreme weather conditions like never before. Rising sea levels, heat waves, unpredictable weather patterns. The Earth is warming faster than ever before, and it's because of human consumption of fossil fuels. On December 10, 1985, Carl Sagan, one of the world's brightest astronomers and science communicators, gave a speech to the United States Congress. Everything you're about to watch was said 39 years ago, but it could have as well been said yesterday, since nothing has really changed. At the time the speech was given, the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was 346 parts per million. Today, it's 421 parts per million. If we don't do something collectively, we will reach tipping points in the next 40 years that will endanger our planet's ecosystem. Carl Sagan offers a masterclass in explaining what climate change is, what could happen, and what we can do about it. Here is that speech.
As I understand my function, it is to give some sense of what the greenhouse effect is, to try to say something about greenhouse effect on other planets, to again underscore that this is a real phenomenon, and then perhaps I can take the liberty to say a few remarks about what to do about it. The power of human beings to affect and control and change the environment is growing as our technology grows. And at present time, we clearly have reached the stage where we are capable, both intentionally and inadvertently, to make significant changes in the global climate and in the global ecosystem. And we've probably been doing, on a smaller scale, things like that for a very long period of time. For example, slash and burn agriculture, which has been with us for tens of thousands of years probably, changes the climate to some extent by changing the albedo, the reflectivity of the Earth. That massive changes have occurred is clear from the historical record. For example, Egypt was once the breadbasket of the Roman Empire. It may be the same role as the American Midwest plays today. That is certainly no longer the case. It's not a greenhouse effect issue. It may be an overgrazing issue, but is an example of how humans are perfectly capable of making these unexpected and inadvertent changes. Because the effects occupy more than a human generation, there is a tendency to say that they are not our problem. Of course, then they are nobody's problem. Not on my tour of duty, not on my term of office. It's something for the next century. Let the next century worry about it. But the problem is that there are effects, and the greenhouse effect is one of them, which have long time constants. If you don't worry about it now, it's too late later on. And so in this issue, as in so many other issues, we are passing on extremely grave problems for our children when the time to solve the problems, if they can be solved at all, is now. If you ask what determines the Earth's climate, clearly the main thing that determines it is sunlight. Sunlight is what heats the Earth. Not all the light that arrives at the Earth from the sun goes to heating the Earth. Some of it is reflected back. It's just the part that is absorbed. And what happens is there's a certain rate at which sunlight is absorbed by the Earth's surface, and there's a certain rate at which the Earth's surface radiates to space. What comes from the sun is in the ordinary visible part of the spectrum that our eyes are sensitive to. What the Earth radiates into space is in the infrared part of the spectrum, longer waves than red, that our eyes are not sensitive to, but it's as legitimate excuse me, a form of light as the kind that we're used to. Now, if you calculate what the temperature of the Earth ought to be from how much sunlight is being absorbed, equaling how much infrared radiation would be radiated to space, you find that the Earth's temperature, by this simple calculation, is too low. It's about 30 centigrade degrees too low. And why is it too low? It's too low because something was left out of the calculation. What was left out of the calculation? The greenhouse effect. The air between us is transparent, except in Los Angeles and places of that sort, in the ordinary visible part of the spectrum. We can see each other. But if our eyes were sensitive at, say, 15 microns in the infrared, we could not see each other. The air would be black between us, and that's because, in this case, carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is very strongly absorbing at 15 microns and other wavelengths in the infrared. Likewise, there are parts of the infrared spectrum where water vapor absorbs, where we could not see each other if we were only as far apart as we are in this room. If you add these infrared absorbing gases to a planet, then what happens is the sunlight comes in as before, but when the surface tries to radiate to space in the infrared, it is blocked, it is impeded by the absorbing gases. And so the surface temperature has to rise so that there is an equilibrium between what comes in and what goes out. So this is the greenhouse effect. It is a misnomer for more reasons than one. It's a misnomer in particular because that's not how the florist greenhouse works, but that's a very minor point. There are other gases which absorb in the infrared, many of which have been mentioned already: nitrous oxide, methane, the halocarbons, and these are products partly of agriculture. It's fertilizers, refrigeration, aerosol spray cans, and so on, all products of our technology. We don't generate much water into the atmosphere, but we certainly do generate a great deal of carbon dioxide through the burning of wood and fossil fuels, an apparently benign activity. Who could object to humans burning oil and coal, gas, and wood? I'd like to stress that the greenhouse effect makes life on Earth possible. If there were not a greenhouse effect, the temperature would, as I say, be 30 centigrade degrees or so colder, and that's well below the freezing point of water everywhere on the planet. The oceans would be solid after a while. A little greenhouse effect is a good thing, but there is a delicate balance of these invisible gases, and too much or too little greenhouse effect can mean too high or too low a temperature. And here we are pouring enormous quantities of CO2 and these other gases into the atmosphere every year with hardly any concern about its long-term and global consequences. Certainly not all aspects of how increased CO2 and other gases into the atmosphere affect the climate are known. There are still many uncertainties, although the overall picture is, I think, quite clear and quite widely understood and accepted. But there are questions about aerosols, about clouds. You heat up the Earth, how much increase or decrease in cloudiness is there? How does that change the albedo or reflectivity of the Earth? There's questions about the ocean and its response time to an increase in CO2. There are feedback effects, and therefore it is certainly worthwhile to spend some additional money on further research on the subject. Another point is that the significant temperature changes on the Earth between ice ages and out of ice ages, glacial and interglacial time periods, seems to be connected with quite small changes in the amount of sunlight that reaches the Earth due to changes in the Earth's orbital properties, and that is a suggestion that the Earth's climate system may be very delicately dependent on the sorts of factors that we're talking about here, and that's why it makes sense to study past climatic change on the Earth as an attempt to obtain some calibration. Another source of calibration is the other planets. Every planet with an atmosphere has some degree of a greenhouse effect. The most spectacular case by far is the greenhouse effect of Venus. It's the nearest planet. It's a planet about the same mass, radius, density as the Earth, but it is spectacularly different in several respects, one of which is that the surface temperature is about 470 degrees centigrade, 900 Fahrenheit, and that enormous temperature is not due to its being closer to the sun, because Venus is surrounded with bright clouds, and in fact, because it reflects so much light back to space, if that's all that was happening, it would be cooler, not warmer, than the Earth. The reason for this absurdly high temperature on the surface of Venus, which is well understood. I mean, Soviet spacecraft have landed on Venus and, in effect, stuck out a thermometer. There's no doubt that the surface temperature is very high. And later U.S. spacecraft have as well. The reason is a massive greenhouse effect in which carbon dioxide plays the major role. Now, the amount of CO2 in the Venus atmosphere is much larger than here. The atmosphere is almost entirely carbon dioxide, and there's 90 times more of it there than here. But it is an indication of what can happen in an extreme case. You look at Mars or Jupiter or Titan, the big moon of Saturn, and you have additional examples of greenhouse effects, different gases, different amounts of sunlight reaching the surface, different planetary albedos and cloudiness, and in all those cases there is also a greenhouse effect. In addition, it has been possible to calculate those greenhouse effects fairly accurately, so that the kind of theoretical armamentarium which is used to calculate the greenhouse effect changes on the Earth, is also used for other planets and therefore can be calibrated to some extent against those other planets. If we keep coming out with the right answer in all those different cases, then probably we understand fairly well how greenhouse effects work. It would, however, be worthwhile, along the lines that Senator Gore was talking about, to have an increased program through NASA to understand the greenhouse effects on other planets. This might be a very practical application of planetary exploration. As you've heard, the best estimates, they certainly have some uncertainty attached to them, are that at the present rate of burning of fossil fuels, the present rate of increase of minor infrared absorbing gases in the Earth's atmosphere, that there will be a several centigrade degree temperature increase on the Earth, global average, by the middle to the end of the next century, and that has a variety of consequences, including redistribution of local climates, and through the melting of glaciers, an increase in global sea level. There is concern on a somewhat longer time scale about the collapse of the West Antarctic ice sheet, and a general rise of many, many meters in sea level. So we have a kind of handwriting on the wall. Certainly there's more research to be done, but as I say, there is a consensus. What can be done about it? The idea that we should immediately stop burning fossil fuel has such severe economic consequences that no one, of course, will take it seriously. But there are many other things that can be done. One has to do with subsidies for fossil fuels. More efficient use could be encouraged by fewer government subsidies. Secondly, there are alternative energy sources, some of which are useful, at least locally. Solar power is certainly one that might be of more general use. Safe fission power plants, which are in principle possible. And then on a longer time scale, the prospect of fusion power. Fission and fusion power plants, in principle, vent no infrared active gases, and therefore whatever other problems they may provide, they do not provide a greenhouse problem. I'd like to close by just saying a few words on the kind of perspective that this problem, as related problems, pose to us. Here is a problem which transcends our particular generation. It is an intergenerational problem. If we don't do the right thing now, there are very serious problems that our children and grandchildren will have to face. It is also a global problem. It is no good if just one or two major industrial nations take major steps to prevent a major increase still further in CO2 and other greenhouse gases, because other nations may, through their industrial development, cause the problem by themselves. And not to say that this is inevitable, but just to give an example. The largest coal reserves on the planet are the United States, the Soviet Union, and China. China is undergoing a very major industrial development, and the burning of coal is certainly something that must be very attractive for the Chinese looking into the future. I would say that there is no way to solve this problem, even if the United States and the Soviet Union were to come to a perfectly good accord on this issue without involving China and many other nations that will be developing rapidly in the time period we're talking about. So here is a sense in which the nations, to deal with this problem, have to make a change from their traditional concern about themselves and not about the planet and the species. A change from the traditional short-term objectives to longer-term objectives. And we have to bear in mind that in problems like this, the initial stages of global temperature increase, one region of the planet might benefit while another region of the planet suffers. And there has to be a kind of trading off of benefits and suffering, and that requires a degree of international amity which certainly doesn't exist today. I think that what is essential for this problem is a global consciousness, a view that transcends our exclusive identifications with the generational and political groupings into which by accident we have been born. The solution to these problems requires a perspective that embraces the planet and the future, because we are all in this greenhouse together.
Picture this. You're in a crowded cafe surrounded by noise and busyness. To your right, a nervous couple on a date struggles to connect. A young lady takes a photo of her cute pastry. Two boys dine with their father, one lost in a Mr. Beast video with headphones on, the other immersed in TikTok, ignoring their dad. As you turn to your laptop, you catch your own reflection, and it's a gut-wrenching reminder that you're no different from the people you've been observing. It's not just the cafe. At home, you play games alone. On good nights, you might share a GG in comms. On bad nights, it's cheap jabs at strangers. When you first moved here, you tried socializing. A game developer you met at a volunteer center seemed cool, until his stronger views on the future of AI on X turned you off. And now here you are, alone on another Saturday night. Rather than risk bad friendships, you find solace in your social media feed, and it's not that you lack friends. After all, you've got your Discord buddies, college friends for meme exchanges, and the girl at your local gym with whom you share occasional awkward yet endearing glances. This is what friendship looks like in the digital age. Perpetually connected, yet ironically more isolated. Is this modern form of friendship changing core aspects of our personalities? How we think, interact, and even value friendships? Algorithms feed us content tailored to our tastes, creating echo chambers that narrow our perspectives. And while older generations shared common cultural moments, we find ourselves with fewer unifying experiences and more forces pulling us apart. So is this shift hurting us, or is the internet actually helping us find like-minded people?
There's an argument for all sides in this conversation, and we're diving deep into this age of human connection to answer a question that might feel unsettling. Has the internet ruined friendship? Let's continue down this positive line of thinking before we get too bleak. The internet may have changed our friendships, but it's also made a lot of amazing things possible. Think about it for a second. We get to connect with people all around the world, keep childhood friendships alive, and even find entire communities of people that share our exact interests, down to the most obscure things. There's a community out there for basically everyone. With an individualized experience, you're served exactly what resonates with you, which has some strong perks. Especially in validation and feeling parallel dimension life we have on our phones. Whether we're waiting in line, grabbing coffee, or at a concert, human beings have a unique ability to remain engaged with whatever they want, all thanks to the power of a super rectangle. Not really, though. We're never fully present at any given moment. Mindfulness is on a steep decline, and studies reflect this. A study by the Mindfulness Journal outlined how there's a 95% correlation between smartphone use and lower levels of mindfulness. But it's not the phones that are the problem, it's the dopamine hit of anxiety related to the internet and social media. Instead of uploading posts for their loved ones, people find themselves pacing in anticipation for their followers to view a post, send in likes, comments, or any form of validation they can get their hands on. You could easily just send your content to its target audience, but internet culture demands the performance ritual of creating a public feed. You are essentially alone in the production phase for a play that nobody's really gonna watch. But if we didn't need to perform, you don't have to make every interaction a public feed. Rip off the band-aid of anxiety and begin to interact with the world in a literal, non-performative sense. Try sending that concert video straight to your friend, or the selfie to your crush. Skip the performance and embrace real connection. When the anxiety over likes fades, all you're left with is a calm, genuine bond. And that shift allows us to cherish what truly matters in relationships. Studies have shown that friendships during our teenage years are the most impactful. This formative time is a period where we begin to transition from naivety into individuals with unique and differing worldviews. At this stage, it's best to take risks, make mistakes, and engage in your curiosities. Nowadays, though, being a teenager is quite tough. Teenage friendships were once built on shared experiences and mutual forgiveness. You can make a mistake, laugh about it, and move on, knowing that in time, everyone would forget. In today's digital age, however, the landscape of friendship has changed dramatically. Now every misstep is potentially recorded and shared online. A single moment of poor judgment can be captured on video, forever etched in the digital world. Apologies lose their weight when overshadowed by the lasting presence of your digital footprint. Mistakes that once would have been forgotten are now permanent scars, replayed and remembered indefinitely. Who can you trust? As a girl who knows if your roommate is secretly recording your vulnerable moments. When you share private photos with your boyfriend, there's a chance it could be kept as some perverted trophy in a shared account with people at your school. How do you react? This new reality is a mentally exhausting time sink. The fear of having mistakes and choices immortalized or shared widely can lead to anxiety, depression, and social withdrawal. It also shapes your interactions, making you conscious of long-term consequences of your actions. Among friends, you never find yourself actually connecting. Sure, you smile in group photos and share memes in the group chat, but you're never actually revealing anything authentic about yourself. The looming fear takes hold and keeps you away from genuine connections. In extreme cases, we've seen some horrible outcomes for teenagers in this digital age. The permanence of every choice can change how and with whom younger generations are willing to connect with. We are obviously more connected than ever, but our social media friendships are extremely shallow. When you hop on Facebook, it's nice to see updates from the kid you met on summer vacation 14 years ago. He's a dad now. You like his post and keep things pushing. But when you stop to think, you remember how special it felt to befriend a kid who didn't make fun of your unibrow. For a moment, you debate on sending him a message expressing how much your short time together impacted you. Nah, you think. I'm doing too much. Here's the kicker. When are you actually ever doing enough? Where do you expect to find genuine connections if not willing to accept vulnerable aspects of yourself? Deep in our hearts, a part of us craves something more meaningful, something that the internet has taught us to bury. This always watching, never connecting dynamic is a double-edged sword with both sides leading to the same outcome. The internet's status quo is one where you never want to be seen as the person doing too much. Maintain the mystery, keep your haters guessing, you post your wins, so nobody ever considers the fact that you have struggles and setbacks. We've gone from genuinely connecting to constantly comparing. What's the result? A silent epidemic of loneliness, masked by online friendships? Authenticity is gone. The facade we present in our social and digital lives is one that's almost impossible to decipher. We'll eventually find ourselves wondering what our real faces look like when we've been wearing masks for far too long. Shallow friendships have a strong impact on our mental health. They have all the masking of something genuine, but it's all hollow inside. It's nice to have someone to react with fire emojis on your post, but where does the friendship actually go from there? When you're able to foster trust, intimacy, and mutual support, the quality of your friendships will reflect better on your mood and outlook on life. The more we chase connections online, the more isolated we feel in real life. The internet once promised to bring us closer. In reality, it's built walls between us. Walls we might not even want to break down anymore. Now is the time to unplug. Picture yourself in a maze, stuck and frustrated as you hit dead end after dead end. What's the best way out? Stop forcing it and take a step back. Sometimes it's not about pushing harder, curating the perfect profile, or interacting with the most mutuals. Instead, it's actually worthwhile to embrace a new perspective. Unplugging lets you see the paths you missed. In an internet designed to leave you in competition with your peers, unplugging can be the greatest tool for charity. True friends are the ones who help us see what we can't on our own. When we unplug and set aside the performative elements of friendship, we open the door to more meaningful connections. with their support and insights, confusing paths start to make sense. But remember, unplugging isn't just about stepping away from the internet entirely, it's about choosing to invest in the people that truly matter.
To be alone forever. Some people's greatest fear. A table for one at a fancy restaurant, falling asleep in a cold bed, a quiet, empty house. With no one to share your wins and losses with, no one to witness your happiest moments or comfort you in your most difficult ones. It's that sinking feeling in your chest